Hello, everyone. This is Design to Play episode 9. This is a series where we go through and play through what I believe to be significant releases in gaming's history, something that we can learn from. I play through the game, spend a couple weeks researching the game, then we have a discussion on stream where we talk about things like the development of the game itself, the short backstory of the history of the IP, the studio that developed it, what games came out around the time of the release of the game, to know what was expected and what the climate of gaming was at the time. What was influential, what was groundbreaking about the game, and most importantly, what we can learn from the game. So today we will be having a discussion that takes part, it's focused on Doom 1993, the original Doom in the IP. So first, before we actually get into the discussion, there's a couple things I want to talk about first. First and foremost, the vast majority of information and sources that I have for this discussion is going to be taken from the book Masters of Doom. Can be taken from the book Masters of Doom: How Two Guys Created an Empire and Transformed Pop Culture. And this is a book that was written by David Kushner. This is a man who contributed to stories in the New York Times, Rolling Stones, and Wired. He is a, not just a big fan of video games, but is actually a credited author, a reputable writer. And this was the first book that he actually ever wrote. And so he took it kind of to an extreme, some people would argue. And he basically wrote the book with interviews that he made over the course of 5 full years. So he talked to, of course, the major people at id. He talked, he had interviews with John Romero, John Carmack, and Tom Hall, and other members of id. But he also was looking for absolutely anyone who could be considered close to id during the years of their developments, whether that was, former co-workers at different companies that they worked at, or if it was just really anyone that he could reach out to connected to them. Even if they were basically just would be considered incidental characters, he really believed that every single person that they came in contact with throughout the years of the development of id would add to the fuller picture of the story. Masters of Doom is not a book specifically and strictly about Doom. It chronicles the history of id Software as a whole. So it covers, there's a chapter that covers John Carmack's childhood, John Romero's childhood, how they got into coding and programming and video games, and then it goes on to follow how they founded id Software, how they were with Softdisk, and how they split with Apogee, or how they partnered with Apogee and how they split from both of them, and then the development of Wolfenstein and Doom and Quake. And so it's a very large general history of id Software, not Doom specifically itself. I do believe the book was released in 2005, I think. So it does, it's by today's standards, fairly old, and it, doesn't cover a whole lot of stuff because, there were many games to be made after Quake, but I believe it cuts off after Quake, generally around that point. If anyone is at all curious, highly recommend the book. Absolutely fascinating. It is not a book where people, it's there. He's not writing a book about the guys at id, so he just paints them in a beautiful picture and a wonderful light the entire time. He, talks about their negatives as well. So a very good book. But because this book is so comprehensive, lots and lots of different resources and information on the development of book refer to this book specifically. I have a process of how I go through and look for different information about these discussions. And as I started doing the same thing for this game, I realized lots and lots of different resources referred to this book specifically. So if I were to go with a lot of those different resources, I would basically repeat a lot of the information, and I was still able to gather more information that wasn't strictly said in the book, because the book was in 2005. That was 15 years ago. But if you are watching this video on YouTube and you do go into the description to look for the sources for more information, which I do post the sources for my videos, and I do post the sources for information in my videos, you will see that the source list is going to be a lot shorter this time, and that is because a lot of the information comes from this book specifically. So thank you very much for being patient while I got this discussion prepared and taken care of. This time period when Doom came out was a very difficult time period. A lot of the discussions that I have in this series tends to be games that are I aim for after the year 2000 for lots of different reasons, but one of the benefits to that is a lot of this information starts to become more archived. It's posted online a lot more, they get backed up, and there's a lot more interviews that get shared online. It just becomes a lot easier to research this information. Doom being released in 1993, the internet was not widespread, it was not universal, and it wasn't a thing that was installed in most people's households. Because of that, all games had less coverage, less information that was easily accessible. We'll learn more about that when we get to the reviews section of it. But also an important thing to note, all games back in this time period in 1993 were essentially basically all 360p. All artwork was pretty much very low resolution. Promotional artwork tended to be low resolution as well. Pictures taken with cameras were low resolution, and I'm pretty sure just the whole world in 1993 was low resolution. So a lot of the images that I use in to accompany the discussion are going to be a lot lower resolution, and I apologize for that. It was either no images or at least have something. So I thought about just stretching the images out, but I thought that would look very ballooned and not great at all. So better than nothing. And what else? Oh, also because of the time period as well, I had to reformat how I do some of the discussion, again, just because of the time period. So this was a very, very fun game to research. It was very, very interesting, but it was also a lot harder to research, and it took a lot more time. So that's why this discussion took so long. So last thing we'll do before we actually get into the discussion, let's just establish a couple things with the game. This right here, this is John Romero. This is the man he's one of the programmers and one of the level designers for Doom. This right here is John Carmack. He is the other programmer for Doom, but he's the one who actually created the engine that Doom ran on, whereas Romero is the one who created like tool interfaces for the other developers to work with. So we have John Romero, John Carmack, and then we have Adrian Carmack. Adrian Carmack is in no way related to John Carmack, just pure coincidence in his last name. He's the main artist for Doom. So these three guys have very similar names, and they will going to be referred to quite a bit. And it was very, very confusing in the early stages of research. So I'm just going to set ahead of time and let you guys know who I'll be referring to. If I am saying Carmack, I am referring to John Carmack. This is the guy who created the engine. He's the one with the glasses. If I say Romero, I'm talking about John Romero. He's the one with the long, luscious locks. He is the other programmer and kind of the middleman for all of it. If I say Adrian, I'm talking about Adrian Carmack. Adrian is the one that's in the middle. He is the one who created most of the art style for Doom. Okay, so Carmack is John Carmack. Romero is John Romero. Adrian is Adrian Carmack. Just wanted to get that ahead of time out of the way. Is his middle name John? I wouldn't be fucking surprised. Or if his middle name was Romero. Hey, what's up, Ninja? I basically just kind of gave my general ideas on the book, actually just like a minute ago. I didn't get to finish the entire full book because it's a very long book, and I had a lot of other research to get done, and researching this game was a little bit difficult compared to other games, so I didn't get to finish yet. I plan on finishing it. It's absolutely fascinating, and I absolutely recommend it for anyone who's at all interested in video game history in the slightest. They follow years and years of the development, the progression of it as a software company evolving, and they also talk about the advancement of their technology as well as the technology of gaming at the time, and it's wild. We'll talk about that as well when we get to the engine to really frame what the time period was like and what video games were like at the time. So it's gonna be cool. All right, so now that we've gotten those out of the way, we can actually talk about Doom. Let's get to a little bit of background info on Doom itself. Doom 1993 was released December 10th, 1993, and it was developed by id Software. id Software was founded on February 1st, 1991. This was founded by four members: John Romero, John Carmack, Adrian Carmack, the three members I talked about, as well as Tom Hall. We'll get to him later. id Software has made quite a few different IPs throughout their days, and the first one that they created was Commander Keen. Commander Keen was their first original release, fully made by id Software. Technically, id had made multiple different games under contract with another company called Softdisk, but those were games that they had to make under another company, and they weren't really full-fledged games. They were games, but they weren't their own creative ideas. There was more of a contractual obligation. They were forced to pump out a game every single month. So if you look up the releases by id Software, you will find lots of other releases, and you'll probably find other releases before Commander Keen. However, in terms of IPs that they created and that they own themselves, the first one they created was Commander Keen. I told you the resolution of the images were going to be smaller. Commander Keen was their first original release, fully made and owned by id Software. It was a 2D platformer that started off originally as a proof of concept for Mario on PC. Because of the limitations of PC back then, smooth scrolling horizontally was thought to be impossible. But with Carmack's outside of the box thinking and programming, he was able to create an engine that actually did make it possible. The engine was originally made to recreate Super Mario Bros. 3 identically in its full entirety on the PC as a port, and they sent it to Nintendo, but Nintendo responded they were not interested in bringing Mario to the PC. Later, afterwards, a different publisher named Apogee Software had reached out to id Software, asking them to create a game, and one of the members of the team, Tom Hall, suggested that they make their own 2D platformer with the engine that was created. They had been asked to create a sequel to another game that they had made for soft disk, but they did not own the rights to it, so Tom Hall suggested they make a game similar to how they made the Mario game. And that game eventually became the Commander Keen series that had 2 full trilogies. I think there was 6 games released in total. Very, very successful. After that, there was Wolfenstein 3D. This is the one that most people know of as being one of the original games that it had created. And Wolfenstein was an FPS, very, very similar to Doom. Whereas most people consider Doom to be the father of all FPSs, Wolfenstein is considered to be the grandfather. Following the 2 Keen trilogies, it decided to make a new game with the engine Carmack had been working on, and one of the first ideas that came to mind was to remake Castle Wolfenstein. This was a game that John and both the Johns and many of the members had played previously. It was an older game, but the team was worried that they wouldn't be able to get the name to use Wolfenstein due to trademark issues. So the team contacted the developers at Silas Warner, the previous developers who had made the game, and it had learned that the companies involved in the creation with Wolfenstein were gone and the trademark had lapsed, so it was free to make another Wolfenstein game, and they made the Wolfenstein 3D. They made Wolfenstein 3D recreated. I believe it still owns the IP to Wolfenstein 3D. This became their second major IP and definitely put them on the map in a larger scale. But this is more or less this is their second major IP. And then after Wolfenstein, we had Doom, the series that is still getting new releases to this day. There was actually a release earlier this year, Doom Eternal, and this is the game we'll be talking about today, so we'll get more into that later. After Doom, we have the IP Quake. And Quake is a series that followed up Doom. Quake first released in 1996. And to be completely honest, I don't really know too much about this series. There was a lot, as I said, there's a lot of research to be made about Doom in general. And it had a way of making their games very similar in certain ways, and I didn't want to get my wires crossed or get confused, so I didn't really dive into learning a lot about Quake. I didn't continue reading the book, so I don't really know a whole lot about Doom. All I know is that it was monumentally influential in the same way that Doom was. A lot of people consider, Wolfenstein, they, lightning struck. Doom, they managed to make lightning strike twice, and apparently Quake, people considered that it had managed to make lightning strike 3 times. So it was a very, very important game, very beloved. And then after Quake, the last major IP that it has made was Rage. And it first came out in 2011, and the first Rage game was actually the last game that was created under the supervision of John Carmack. A lot of the different members of id that we listed had left id over the years, and John Carmack was the last one to leave, and Rage was the last game that was under the supervision of John Carmack before he left. Same thing with Rage as with Quake. I really don't know a whole lot about this series. I do know that Rage 2 was released, I think 2019. So there was a new Rage game that came out recently as well. But that was the last major new IP that it had introduced. So Doom, again, being the first game in the series, there isn't really a whole lot to talk about when it comes to background info on Doom or the IP, because it pretty much all started here. Most of the discussion we'll talk about most of its history will take place in the discussion. The only thing that I can really think to bring up is that Wolfenstein was kind of like a beta version of Doom, or more like a proof of concept. They were both very fast-paced hallway shooters, first-person hallway shooters. They both have secret passageways hidden all throughout the game. But Doom was their own, as I said, their own original IP. It wasn't something that they took from someone else. It's something they created wholly as their own. And Doom was built on a much more advanced engine, leading to better graphics, better lighting, and completely different geometry. Quake Champions came out 2 or 3 years ago. I did not know they were still making Quake games as well. I guess it's not a huge surprise. Yeah, I've heard lots and lots of things about the Quake games. But I had heard that it was, the same thing as Doom, where it was the older games were still avidly being played. I had no idea that they were continuing to make new ones. I mean, people still play the new Doom games as well, but big thing about Doom is that, the older ones age so well that people keep playing it. I heard the same thing about Quake. Didn't really know that they made new Quake games. That's a Gabjack. All right, so that's a little bit background info on Doom. So let's talk about Doom and how it took shape. So we briefly touched on some of the team behind the team who made Doom, but that was mostly just to cover the names and get those straight. Now let's actually get into more information about them. So we're going to talk about the Johns. I had to use this photo. This photo is absolutely fucking fantastic. So the first one we're going to talk about is John Carmack. This is the gentleman with the sword and the glasses, and who's actually pretty fucking jacked. John Carmack was the head programmer of Doom. He was the one who made the actual engine that the game itself would run on. All of Carmack's goals and motivations were tied to just creating better and stronger engines and programs. He didn't want fame, he didn't want fortune, he didn't want attention, he didn't want to build an empire, he didn't want to have a massive business. He just, his motivations in life were just to make enough money to get by so that he could continue making better programs and better games. He was all about programming for him. That was his whole motivation. That was his calling in life. A lot of people struggle to figure out what they're meant to do in life. He had no issues whatsoever. He knew exactly what he needed to do. And it would not be an exaggeration to say that he was a genius when it came to programming. In the book, there was a passage that they talked about where apparently in conversation, Jay Wilbur and Kevin Cloud, this was id's business manager and one of id's artists respectively, they were talking about getting life insurance for the team members. However, Jay piped up in response to that and said that only John Carmack would really be the only one needed to be covered because everyone else in the team was expendable. He was, and this sounds very, very cold. I mean, they were all very good friends with each other, and everyone on the team was very, very good at what they did, and their contributions to the final products were extremely important. But Carmack's capabilities and what he could do were the only ones on the team that could not be replicated by anyone. So the advances that Carmack made in his engines were the whole reason that id was able to make the groundbreaking software that they could and really get themselves put on the map and the recognition that they deserved. Again, they all made great games, and all of them coming together were just a perfect balance for creating great games, and we'll talk about that later. But all of them really were skilled, but not something that couldn't be recreated. Carmack's was the only one. His ability to advance the engines was something that only he could do. So Carmack is very important. And then the other John, we have John Romero. This is the one with, oh, that is his sword. It's sheathed. I thought it was like an axe of some sort. He's the one with the brown hair. John Romero is the other lead programmer. He is the one who took Carmack's engines and created tools with it that allowed the artists and other members of the team to actually create the game itself. So Carmack would create the actual architecture, the engine itself, and then Romero was able to create the tools that let everyone interact with the engine and the space and create things in it. Romero was also the one who really clicked with Carmack on a programmer level and kind of became like a middleman. As I said, Carmack's thing, everything was about programming. Carmack loved video games. He really enjoyed them, but his big thing was programming. And Romero also loved programming, but his thing was video games. But because they had that middle ground programming, Romero was able to be that middle guy between the two of them, and the two bonded over the love of programming, and they had this kind of connection between each other. And it also allowed them to bounce ideas off of each other, because Carmack would create the engine but Romero would find ways to actually utilize that engine and make use of it in the actual physical space of the game. So sometimes Romero would think of an idea of something that might be able to be done with the game based on the engine that Carmack had created, and then Carmack could then go and update the engine to reflect that, because again, Carmack loved to push his programs and his engines even further. So anytime there was kind of a challenge set forth by Romero, Carmack was very happy to respond to it. So they worked very, very well together. And the other thing is, Romero was id's rock star kind of character. He was by far id's #1 fan, and he was the person who would always hype up their products and the things they were doing, and he would support id Software more than anyone else on the team. He would be the one to do interviews, he would publicly speak for the company, and he was the one who wanted to be in the limelight. So those are both of the Johns. And then next we have Adrian. There wasn't many pictures of Adrian actually showing his face back in 1993. So here's the same picture he is before. He is again the one in the middle. Again, Adrian Carmack, no relation to John Carmack, just coincidence. He is the main artist for id Software. Doom was everything that Adrian had wanted to make for years. When Adrian was younger, he had a job where he photocopied injuries of patient injuries at a hospital for records. And while working this job, he had seen some very extreme stuff that really heavily influenced his artistic direction for things he wanted to make later. And so all the games he had made up until that point didn't really let him scratch that creative itch. We'll talk about it later. You know, they met at the company Softdisk, and he was mostly making artwork for basic computer programs. And then when he would team up with id to create more games, he made the Commander Keen games, and the Commander Keen games, as we saw, were very child-friendly games, similar and based off of Mario. And he really, really, really hated doing these squeaky clean type of playful art style. And Wolfenstein was definitely a lot better because it was more gory, but it still wasn't the dark, twisted imagery that Adrian had really longed to make. And then when Doom finally came around, that was everything he had wanted to do for years. These evil, monstrous, vile spawns from hell with their menacing appearances, the way their bodies would explode and fall into a pile of organs when they died, the tortured souls that would be impaled and left as scenery in the environment. All of this was absolutely perfect for Adrian, and he really, really was able to flourish with the creation of this game. Commander Keen also introduced us to Dirtfish and the Yorps, I think they're called. Yeah, the designs for Commander Keen were pretty cute. And I love that, but I could see why, knowing what Adrian wanted to create, it would probably be a little bit torturous for him. So next we have Tom Hall. Tom Hall was id's game designer. He would be, he would basically the person to direct things. He was also commonly the writer. He would write the stories for the games. He would help design the levels in some ways, and he helped with the overall direction of the game. Now that I think about it, I don't really know if he explicitly programmed. He did meet the id guys at Softdisk, which was a software company, so I imagine he did. Now I think about it, he didn't do any outright major programming, but he was someone who would help design the levels, if anything on paper, to help translate it to the game. But yeah, Tom would write a lot of the stories for the game. However, because the team did not want to include much of a story in Doom, as well as Tom's visions not really seeming to line up with the rest of the team whenever he did try to contribute to the game, Tom ended up leaving id Software 4 months before the release of Doom. But he is going to be very important for the discussion in the creation of Doom, so we'll brought him up and we'll talk more about him later. So next we have Sandy Peterson. This was the man who was brought on the team to fill in for Tom once he left. And Sandy Peterson was a man much older than the rest of the team, at the ripe old age of 37, while most of the id guys were in their early 20s at this point. Sandy had made a pen and paper role-playing game called Call of Cthulhu that had sold over 100,000 copies, and he previously worked at Microprose, the developer and publisher that at the time had recently released the first Civilization game, the first Civ game. So while he was very qualified for the job, Romero was very nervous about hiring him because he saw on the application that he had stated he was Mormon. And Romero was very nervous because they were making a game about devils and hell, and he didn't want to bring anyone religious onto the team because he thought that that would potentially cause some issues. Despite his doubts, Carmack was able to convince Romero to at least give him a chance to bring him in for an interview. So Romero relented and brought him in, and Romero plopped him down in front of a computer and asked him if Sandy was going to make a level in Doom based on the information that they had given them, what would they do? And Sandy immediately got to work and quickly whipped up a level that Romero was very surprised to see that it fit in quite nicely with everything that the team had been making up until that point. So Romero was very impressed with how fast Sandy had picked up on things, and was very happy to add Sandy to a member of the team, and he became their new level designer. Is now a symbol of Easter eggs. Wait, really? That's a dropfish. Oh, dirtfish. Dirtfish. That's hilarious, but why are they known as the symbol of Easter eggs? Oh, they've been Easter eggs in every Doom game. Gotcha. Okay, that makes more sense. I was like, this is supposed to be the universal symbol of Easter eggs. I didn't know there was a universal symbol for Easter eggs. I thought if anything, it would be an Easter egg. I was a little confused. Okay, that makes more sense. All right. So, we've gone over the members of the team. So now we're going to talk about why exactly they chose to do the game as Hell on Mars. Not quite Earth, but Hell on Mars. I had no idea about that, Captain Jack. I'll actually look into that. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. So fresh off the finish of Wolfenstein's expansion, which was called Spear of Destiny, the team was excited to start a new Commander Keen game. Tom Hall was especially excited because the Commander Keen games were definitely seen as his baby. He had spearheaded a lot of the writing and the development when it came to Commander Keen, and just like Adrian would become it's just like Doom would basically become Adrian's perfect game that he wanted to create. Commander Keen was basically the same thing for Tom. Tom, being someone who liked to be a writer, could put a ton of input into the development of Commander Keen. So Tom was very excited when the team said that they want to make another Commander Keen game. Adrian was very much not happy about this, though. Romero and Carmack were initially excited as well, but as Carmack was finishing up the new engine, he realized that Keen's gameplay style didn't quite fit the new engine he had created all that well. The new engine had maximum priority on speed, and Keen being a platformer wouldn't really work too well with how fast and brutal the engine was. So the team started brainstorming new ideas on what they wanted to do next. And the team were actually very huge fans of the Alien series. So they thought they could make a pretty great game based on the movies. After a little bit of research, Jay Wilbur, again, as we talked before, one of the two gentlemen in the conversation about the insurance, Jay Wilbur was its business manager. He found out that the rights for the series were available. And the team did consider reaching out to Warner Brothers to ask if they could make a game based on the movies. But the team in the end decided against it. Because they didn't want some big major movie corporation to be hanging over the development of the game and basically tell them what they could and could not do with the development of the game. The team also realized that the engine that they had, that Carmack had created, they realized how significant and important and all the potential that it had, and they didn't really want to make any kind of compromises when making the game because they thought it would hold back and not be able to show off what the entire engine was capable of. So they decided against it in the end. And in that case, boo, they should have done that. You're not really? You would have preferred if they had an Aliens game instead of what we got with Doom? Dang. So they went back to drawing board, and eventually Carmack suggested demons. Demons have been something that was very common in Carmack's life. He had grown up going to Catholic school, and demons were talked about all the time during his childhood. And then even to more recent times in his adulthood, the id team had been taking part in a years-long D&D campaign that Carmack was the dungeon master for, and had demons as a very prevalent role. It was actually what ended up destroying the campaign and completely wiping it out. So demons were something that were very common in conversation and Carmack's life in general. So Carmack's thought process when pitching demons was that he thought that the new engine was so incredibly powerful, this incredibly powerful technology. So why not make a game with it? about powerful technology used to fight against demons of hell. Romero heard this and immediately fell in love with the idea because it was something that no one else had really ever done with a game technology versus demons. And Adrian and Kevin were also very excited as they heard about this because they would be able to create their twisted imagery that they had wanted to for so long. And they started referencing art in one of their favorite movies, The Evil Dead 2. At the mention of Evil Dead 2, the team all agreed that they would make a game that was a cross between The Evil Dead 2 and Aliens, which would basically be, horror and hell, blood and science. Happy with the direction for the game. All that was really missing was a name for it. Carmack was ready with suggestions, and he referenced a certain movie, a movie called The Color of Money, a 1986 movie, which was a movie that featured Tom Cruise as a pool hustler. And there's a scene where he walks into one of the pool halls and one of the other players and there points to his suitcase or his little case that he has that has his pool cue. The player points to and says, "What you got in there?" And Tom Cruise just simply smiles at him and replies, "Doom." That's apparently the origin of the name Doom. I don't really know how that really, I don't know. That's supposedly the origin of the name of Doom. I think it's so fucking random. I think it's so weird. I don't know how there's any connection. Doom had started development in 1991. Color of Money came out in 86, so 5 years earlier. It seems like such a random reference. It wasn't even like he had a gun in the case. It was a pool cue. It seems so odd. That's apparently, they swear up and down, that's the origin of the name Doom. I think it's really, really weird, but whatever. Funny enough, I figured I'd mention this too. 5 months later, after they had started working on the game, Warner Brothers would actually approach id and ask him if they wanted to make an Aliens game. In March of 1993, after Warner Brothers had seen Wolfenstein, they thought that the Alien franchise would be a good fit for them to make something. And the team decided to think it over, mull it over again. And, again, they loved the franchise. They loved the Alien series. And at this point in development, the team had settled on it being a game about a space marine on Mars fighting off a foreign life form. So there definitely was similarities and parallels between Alien and what they were doing for Doom. And they knew that if they combined them together, they probably could make a pretty amazing game. However, they declined for two major reasons. One, aliens weren't the same as demons, and aliens, fighting aliens on a foreign surface was something that had been done before. It basically made too much sense for them, whereas it would be something expected to take on fighting aliens on one of the moons of Mars. They really liked the unexpected idea and the really original idea of fighting demons in space. And the second major reason was the same as before. The team still believed in their product and they didn't want to give up creative control to another company. So let me do that. That is more of the early stages of Doom before the development. So let's wait a second. Did I just lose it? No. Okay. Whew, I thought I missed an entire page in my notes. So now we're going to talk about something else. We'll talk about some of the other games that came out before or around Doom's release. What I like to do here is I like to talk about, whenever I'm talking about a game in the Design to Play series, I like to list the 6 months before, the 6 months after the release of a game, and list all the major releases that happened in that period. Even if they are games that are not at all very similar to the game, I still think it is important to consider because most consumers only have X amount of money they can spend in a certain year period. And I mean, people play lots of different types of games. So while it's definitely, shooters are much bigger competitors to shooters in the marketplace. It is still important to know there are people who play Nintendo games who play FPSs. So if there are 3 major Nintendo titles and 3 major FPSs coming out, it's still something to consider in terms of what that game had to compete with when going to market that year. So we'll be talking about that with Doom. However, again, this is one of those parts of my research that came up a little bit, it was a little bit more difficult to do because of its time period. So a lot of games nowadays tend to get It's a lot easier to track when releases come out, whether it's major or not. Even if you go to Wikipedia and you just look up releases year by year basis, even like the most shovelware crap, like the movie tie-ins, these TV show adaptation stuff, they all get listed on there. The lists are very long. When you go back to the year 1993, though, there definitely wasn't as many video games being released because there weren't. It was a lot more difficult to be an independent developer, and when it came to computer games, the distribution of them was very, very different. It really wasn't tracked quite as well. So this list is probably not that great, not that accurate, and I apologize. I tried my best. I'm sure they're going to be someone who is at some point going to be like, you forgot this game, and I do apologize. But let's talk about some games that came out around Doom's release. Big Alien fan. Yeah, unfortunately, Alien didn't really get a whole lot of good video games, did it? So leading up to the release of Doom, this would be the 6 months beforehand. In terms of games that would be a competitor to it, Mortal Kombat 2 would be released to arcades and take the world by storm. Samurai Showdown was another game that would be released in arcade as an arcade cabinet. This was another gruesome fighting game similar to Mortal Kombat, and this is made by SNK, the team who's behind Fatal Fury. And also in the 6 months leading up to Doom's release, we had Duke Nukem 2. As far as non-competitors leading up to the 6 months before Doom, we had Star Fox, the first one in the series, would be released. Kirby's Adventure, which was interesting enough. This was the second Kirby game that was introduced, and I did not realize this. This was the game that introduced the ability stealing mechanic. Apparently, in the first Kirby game, that wasn't even a thing. I had no idea. Kirby in the first game could not steal powers. He would suck up the enemies and then spit them back out as projectiles every single time. It was only in the second game, Kirby's Adventure, did it introduce the power stealing mechanic. That was fucking wild to me. I had no idea. So we had Star Fox, Kirby's Adventure, and then we have Day of the Tentacle. This was one of the LucasArts point and click adventure games. These were very, very popular. And then we had Link's Awakening would come out. The first Secret of Mana game would come out. We had Sonic CD was released. We had Aladdin for the Sega Genesis, and then we also had Myst. Myst was a huge, very, very big game. This was a first-person puzzle game, and it became the best-selling PC game of all time until it was debunked by The Sims in 2002. So this game would come out, be released, and would be the top-selling PC game that would stay at the top of the hill for almost a decade. This came out in 1993, and Sims would come out in 2002. So this was a monster of a game that came out, and it absolutely hated this game, could not stand this game. They basically wanted to be everything this game wasn't, because Myst was very atmospheric, but it was very slow. It had no action. It was very low frame rate in terms of, it was slow because your character moved slow, but everything in the game was slow as a whole. This game took the world by storm. People loved it, but it absolutely could not stand this game. So those are the games that came before the release of Doom. As for games that came after the release of Doom, I couldn't find anything after the release of Doom for 6 months that would be considered some sort of competitor to the game. But a couple other major games that would come out would be Sonic the Hedgehog 3, Super Metroid would release, and one of the biggest franchises ever would finally come to market and just completely take over the gaming world, and that would be Bubsy 2. Assume it's an original copy, Miss. Dang. I've seen some gameplay of it. I had no idea. I had heard, talks about how big of a game Myst was, but I had absolutely no clue just how monumental Myst was until I started doing research for this game. Apparently Myst was giant. So again, the list is a lot shorter because in order to really release a game, you had to work with a publisher, and there were not, I guess there were more consoles, but it was just, I don't know, so many different things about this time period. Video games were still kind of a budding thing. So not nearly as many games to talk about on this list when it comes to the games leading up to or after the release period. So those are the games that came out around Doom's release. Now let's talk about Doom, the actual final product itself. So Important. Let's start off right off the bat and get this out of the way. Doom was not the first FPS. It is referred to frequently as the father of the FPS genre, and while that is technically true, it's also not quite accurate. Doom may be referred to the father of FPSs, but Wolfenstein is considered to be the grandfather of FPSs. Wolfenstein was a game that was made by id that came out a little over a year before Doom and can be almost seen as a proof of concept for Doom itself. They were both FPSs. However, FPSs had existed before Wolfenstein had existed. For example, we had Maze War. This was a game that came out in 1973, and it was a PC game where two computers would connect to each other, and each player would have to move through a maze in a tile-based system, find the other player's avatar, and shoot the other player first. It was released in 1973, and this is the earliest example of an FPS that we could find. This was in 1973, 20 years before Doom was created. So Doom was not the first FPS. And then after Maze War, we had Battlezone. This is the game that came out in 1980. This was an arcade game where players would control a tank from inside the tank in a first-person perspective, where they would move around in a 3D space, avoiding environmental geometry, as you can see the box off to the side over there. And they would be maneuvering, trying to find other enemy tanks, and shooting and destroying them before the player themselves would get shot and killed. 3D first-person shooters were something that had existed for some time. However, games like this were not called first-person shooters. These types of games were often referred to as 3D adventure games or virtual reality games, or games that gave you the feeling of being really there. It wasn't until much later the term FPS would be coined. And I couldn't find the exact turning point when this happened. I would estimate it was around 1995 or 1996, because for the first couple years after Doom came out, any kind of FPS was referred to as a Doom clone. Eventually, the term changed over. Apparently, the term had changed to FPS by the time Quake had come out, which was 1996. So probably, if I had to guess, about 2 years after Doom's release, so around 1995. Hi, Jacob. But yeah, FPSs had existed for quite a long time. They themselves had even made their own first-person shooters before they had made Wolfenstein itself. For example, Hover Tank 3D was the game that it had made in 1991. This was a year before Wolfenstein, and then their following game would be Catacomb 3D. And this was a game that was released just 6 months before Wolfenstein 3D came out. You could definitely see the influences and how this game was kind of a precursor to Wolfenstein itself, but id themselves had been making FPSs for quite some time before they had made Doom. So even though Doom is often referred to as the father of FPSs, it's important to know that it was not the first FPS. It was actually Wolfenstein that was the first FPS that was made in a way that was recognizable and comparable to how we see FPSs in modern times. And Wolfenstein was the first to be successful in a financial and critical way. But despite its wild success, it was still limited to a relatively small audience. And since it was distributed online exclusively and not through in-person retailers, it really... it also didn't have a whole lot of advertising. It was successful, but not really on a massive scale. Doom was just taken a step further in terms of its success and its reach compared to Wolfenstein, with it affecting the rest of the world in multiple different ways as opposed to being a massive underground success. So Doom was pretty much the one that brought FPSs to the mainstream, and really kind of cemented the format in which FPSs would be created. It is the father of FPSs, but it's not by any stretch of the imagination the first FPS. All right. So, now that we've established that, let's talk about the engine, because the engine was the reason why Doom was able to be made, and again, the reason why it was able to put themselves on the map to stand out from the rest of other developers. Carmack loved gaming a ton, but his passion above all was programming, as we said. We lightly touched on the Commander Keen series about how it was a game that was originally based off of Super Mario Brothers 3, so we're going to dive into that just a little bit. Back when Super Mario Bros. 3 had come out, it was thought impossible to create a game like that on PC. There was no way to create a smooth transition of horizontal movements like the way that was done in Mario, because computers were simply just too weak back then. They were incapable of doing it. But through some clever outside of the box thinking, Carmack was able to exploit how a computer stored and displayed pixels on screen to make computers run much faster and smoother, and basically as smooth as Super Mario Bros. 3, but on PC. Programmers, this was in 1991, I believe, when he managed to pull this off. Super Mario Bros. 3 came out in 87, 88? Actually, I meant to check that. ...1988. So Mario Bros. 3 had been out in 1988. Nintendo NESs were everywhere. For 3 years, programmers have been trying to basically recreate a similar type of experience with horizontal movement, and no one was able to do it. You better believe if someone had been able to pull it off, it would have been known, because that eventually turned into the Commander Keen series, which really started to put it on the map. So for 3 years, developers and programmers have been trying to basically create horizontal movement to get around the restrictions of a PC, and no one was able to do it, but Carmack was the one who figured it out. And this was all because Carmack's motivations were about making better programming more than anything else. Excuse me. While the team worked on their expansion for Wolfenstein, the Spear of Justice, they used the same engine and assets as the main game, while Carmack went and worked on a new engine. And let's also take a second to explain this. Back in this time of gaming, there weren't established engines that everyone used. I realize I've been talking about engines a whole lot, and I probably should explain this. Yeah, back in that time period when it came to gaming, there weren't established engines that everyone used. Nowadays, the vast majority of games are made with a few select engines. Wow, you can't even see that on this background. Sorry. That shit. Can't even see it. Sorry about that. Put on a white background. There we go. Now you can see all four of them. So we have the top left is the Frostbite engine, the bottom left is CryEngine, the top right is Unreal Engine, and the bottom right is Unreal Engine. Sorry, that was the last image I edited and made to fit in the outline, and I was just so fucking dead tired I didn't even think about it. My bad. But nowadays, the vast majority of games you see today will be made with a few selective engines. These four encompass most of the games on the market. But this is because making a new engine with modern fidelity and complexity of games is a massive undertaking to do in terms of time and money to create. Even after a company creates a new engine, you then have to train people to use it. So if you were to hire someone onto your team and they had made games in the Unity engine before, and the game you're working on is in the Unity engine, that is a lot of time saved, and they're able to actually slide into the process of getting them on board and working with the team a lot quicker and a lot easier, as opposed to having to work a brand new engine and figure out how to use it. Back in the olden days of 1993, games were much simpler and advancing at a much more rapid rate. Because of this, games were commonly made on new engines all the time, as programmers would frequently create newer and stronger engines with better features. I mean, you compare that to current times now, where whenever Unity or Unreal has a new version that's released, it's a massive showcase with thousands of people tune in online to see what that new engine can do. So the fact that gaming was so old and they were so simple but rapidly advancing, it made it so that there was always new advancements being made, that it would, if you stuck with your same engine for more than 2 games, you were probably holding yourself back severely. Yes, over the years in development, many developers have made their own engine and the process to optimize the platforms, which it is a rough achievement. That's also true. You could still successfully make the engine itself, but who knows if it's going to run smoothly or cleanly, especially in comparison to other games as well. So yeah, in modern day times, it's very rare for engines for games to use engines outside of this group right here. Yes, you could have these examples where, you know, very simple 2D pixel games, sprite-based games probably could use their own unique engines, but when it comes to anything in 3D, in most cases, it's one of these four, one of this group. Again, as the team was working on the expansion for Wolfenstein, Carmack got hard to work on making his new engine. And Carmack's main goal with the engine he was making would end the engine that would end up being used for Doom. His main goal was to make it as fast and as smooth as possible, maximum frame rate for the most realistic and responsive game that the team could create. And I really tried, guys. I promise I did. I tried my absolute best to understand what about the advances in this engine were so awe-inspiring and creative and groundbreaking. They explain it in the book. It's like a leaf-based system. They described it with a branching thing, and programming just isn't my thing. So I couldn't really grasp the specifics on how this engine functioned the way it did and why it was so groundbreaking. But I can tell you specifically what he was able to do with it that made it so that the engine itself was groundbreaking and what things could be done in game specifically. So I can't tell you the how, but I can talk about the results of the changes in this engine. So one of the first things was texture mapping to the floor and the ceiling. If you look at Wolfenstein, the ceilings and the floors were all just one simple, bland, flat color. I think we also had for the catacomb image, the catacomb 3D, yeah, it's just a gray floor and a black ceiling. Like all for hover tank 3D, black floor, gray floor, black ceiling. It was all just one simple thing. They could do texture mapping to the walls where they would have something more unique to them. But when it came to the floors and ceilings were very, very simple. They could only just be one color. Whereas with this new engine that Carmack had created, he could also put texture mapping to the floors and ceilings. So they would no longer be these drab single color coverage the entire way. The other thing that they were able to do was diminished lighting. Creating dynamic lighting in video games at this time was very difficult because basically the developer would have to alter and change light values of certain areas to give the illusion of dissipating light. So with this new engine that Carmack was creating, you could in the game set a candle over here, set it as it becoming an origin of a light source, and just based on its location, the things around it, the light would act dynamically. Whereas in the past, if developers wanted to create the effect of diminished lighting, they would effectively have to go to a certain location and activate for here it is X amount of light, and then here they would have to change the brightness, and here they change the brightness, and here to change the brightness to give a similar type of feeling, which would be very time consuming, and I imagine at that time it would be very taxing on the systems as well, so they probably couldn't do it. This system allowed it to run on the fly, which was really, really great. They would be able to, you know, set their light points, which would just give it a much more realistic feel, but it would also act and change depending on the spaces around it. As you can see in the image here, we have based on that corner on the wall, you can actually see the light values changing because that's supposed to be the light not really passing near as much there. The team was really, really excited about this part of the engine because things farther away were shaded to be darker, and it made everything automatically scarier without any extra effort on the team's part. Dynamic lighting was going to be huge for bridging the gap between video games and reality at the time. They had to develop their own engine as the id Tech engine. They have to develop their own engine as the id Tech engine, aka back then the Doom engine. I'm not sure what you're trying to say. Are you saying that they developed the engine under the title of id Tech engine? During the creation of this engine as well, Carmack was able to create slopes, which sounds like a very, very mundane thing nowadays. However, when this was created, Kevin Clabb, one of the team's artists, apparently spent 20 minutes going up and down this little slope. It was just that absolutely groundbreaking to him. Really goes to show what the state of games were like at the time, where when someone created a slope, it was worth spending 20 minutes just going up and down because it was so mind-breaking to them. So crazy. Okay, so it was called id Tech. Gotcha. I'll try my best to remember that. I didn't come across that at all. I was doing my research, so I might forget that. So Carmack was able to create slopes. They also had the ability to create non-orthogonal walls. This was kind of hard to find more clear examples of. In Wolfenstein, every single wall had to be a sharp 90-degree turn. And everything was all sharp turns, and it functioned just fine, but it made everything feel more inorganic and, well, boxy. But the ability to make non-orthogonal walls made it so this gave them the ability to create hallways and corridors that didn't have sharp 90-degree turns, but would instead angle slightly and would contribute to a lot to creating a game world that felt more natural. Basically, what the fuck is this? This is supposedly... I guess it's probably transitioning. I have the Doom soundtrack on, and I don't remember that song at all on the Doom soundtrack. Anyway, non-orthogonal walls just basically mean they don't have to be 90-degree turns. They could be deviations of different angles. And you can see in the image on the left side of the screen near that imp, you can see it's basically almost like a 45-degree angle from each side. So it would be intersecting, and then they kind of branch and they meet this way. So they were able to create more organic spaces in the game. And the first level of Doom actually has a section built in to showcase this specifically, where there's a hallway that gradually leans in a direction to the right instead of just a sharp turn. And then inside the room, there's a bunch of toxic waste covering the floor with a zigzagging path to get across to the other side. So this was something that they showcased right off the bat in the first level, as not having everything being required to be 90-degree sharp turns. And then the other thing that was massive was windows. There were sections of the walls the players could see through to the other side and shoot through to the other side, and enemies could shoot through to the other side, but the players wouldn't be able to travel through to the other side. So they could see but not move through. They can interact with by shooting through, but they couldn't actually pass through themselves. Again, it was a functional window, and this itself was absolutely mind-blowing. Did the video stop? Yeah, video did stop. Classic. Yeah, this was, again, just a sign of the time period that Doom was made in, where Windows were a breakthrough in game design. But combining all of these different things, the team were able to make a game that had the potential to basically blur the lines between video games and reality itself. As a person who has attempted super rudimentary 3D graphics can convert all this trivial stuff as an incredible amount of complexity behind it. I imagine it can be. Something I actually just now remembered, but forgot to research more because it was one of those things that just was really difficult for me to grasp at the time. It was apparently also absolutely wild. They were able to make walls that didn't stretch all the way to the ceiling and actually had varying degrees of height to them. In older games, whenever there was a wall, it touched floor to ceiling, and that was how it was. Whereas in Doom, they were able to create walls that had varying different heights to create different architecture and different just environments and feelings in the rooms. And that apparently was also absolutely wild. So despite all of these massive advances in the engine, Carmack told Romero that he was going to be making some special concessions for the engine so that hackers would more easily be able to hack and modify the game to their liking. When Wolfenstein was released, the game had a very large modding community for the game, and Carmack did not anticipate this at all. When people would modify the files for Wolfenstein, a lot of the time the original files were lost in the process, so it would make it very difficult to revert the game to its original state. To play that way again. So when designing Doom, Carmack prepared for this and created a system for storing media files separate from the program files and the rest of the data in these groups called WADs. This is an acronym that stood for Where's All the Data. And every time Doom would boot up, the program would look for the WADs to load in the sounds, the images, the textures, and so on and so forth. With this new WAD system, hackers could just redirect the program to look for the WADs containing audio to find it in a different location. And they could just redirect the program to look for a WAD that the hacker had made. And this would leave the original files for the game intact and completely unharmed. so that if they ever wanted to revert to the original version of the game, it was very, very simple and easy to do so. So if anyone has ever done any kind of hacking or done any kind of home brewing, you've probably heard the term WADs, and that is where this actually comes from. Doom created it originally. WAD stood for where's all the data, and that absolutely fucking blew my mind that Doom was the originator of WADs, or rather probably definitely the coining. I'm sure there are probably other games that had some kind of similar system, but definitely used in the way that it was. Doom was the first. Cute little bunny. Oh, that's right. Totally forgot about that scene. You're right, Jacob. So on top of the WAD system being incorporated from the very start, Carmack also uploaded the source code for the level editor to the public so that anyone who had the game could have the proper tools themselves to edit and tweak the game to the player's preference and create custom content. Carmack knew how many people got their start in programming by hacking and modifying existing games, just like Romero and Carmack did. But yeah, even though Carmack's desire is to make the best programs out there, he was still willing to dial it back just to a certain degree if it meant his programming was more accessible to other people so that they could learn to do it too and get into it. And on top of that, this would be a massive factors to Doom's success. There would be a huge budding community for people who would create custom Doom levels and share them online. And one of these groups of hackers who would go and create their own custom levels for Doom would actually be picked up by id Software themselves to officially release the levels they were working on for a Doom expansion called Final Doom. And even today, there's still a very avid community of modders who create new levels for, again, the original 1993 Doom. Yep, WAD is basically a ROM of the game in MS-DOS. It's a ROM of the game? I was under the impression that a WAD was basically almost like a categorization of certain files for it. So there would be a WAD for audio, there would be a WAD for just basic picture images, and you could then go and just create your own WAD so that it would redirect to there and pull the files from there. I didn't think it was its own ROM, but then again, maybe I don't really know specifically the definition of a ROM. I think of the ROM's functionality, but maybe I just don't know the literal definition of a ROM. But yeah, that was the engine that would become the structure for what would create Doom and how it advanced and how it was how it could be utilized to create the experience that they did. So now let's talk about the story, or the lack thereof. So going back to Commander Keen, these games that it had worked on, it was Tom's prize creation. This was his pet project, the thing he loved most. It was his favorite. And after the team did Wolfenstein, Tom was very, very eager to get back to the Commander Keen trilogy. As we talked about before, the team was very excited to do that, except for Adrian. But as the team realized, looking at the engine, it wouldn't work for Commander Keen, they decided to do something different, and that would become Doom. Tom was very disappointed in this, but he was determined at the very least to make this next game something that had direction and depth when it came to the story, as a stark contrast to Wolfenstein, which he saw it was just a game where you basically blasted guys away because they were Nazis, and that was it. He wanted a game with more substance, and he wanted a game that had lasting consequences for the player's actions, like how he did in Commander Keen. In Commander Keen, there were enemies that you could, kill. And it was actually Tom's direct intervention and suggestion that the bodies stay left behind, that they don't just disappear or evaporate, because he wanted the bodies to stay behind to shine a light on as a better representation of death and to show the results of the player's actions. When Tom pitched the idea of adding more story to Doom, there was some initial support from the team, mostly from Romero, but Carmack famously replied with the quote, "Story in a game is like story in a porn movie. It's expected to be there, but it's not important." Carmack didn't want to do a game with heavy story, and he also didn't want to make the game in a level-based style of build. He wanted to do the game in one giant, large, contiguous world. And Tom was not liking anything that he was hearing. He did not want to create another mindless shooter. He didn't want to abandon id's winning formula of level-based design. Tom believed that players loved the sense of satisfaction they got from completing a level and moving on to the next one. But most important though, Tom didn't want another game without a point. So even though it seemed the team made up their mind, he still went and created something that would famously be known as the Doom Bible. I just show up and hear that I missed a Commander Keen playthrough. No, I did not play Commander Keen. I played pretty much all the first versions of the Doom game. So I played Doom 1, 2, 3, Doom 64, which I didn't know was made by id, but played the first Doom games. Playing the next Doom games. Don't really have an interest in playing Commander Keen though. Hackers have reverse engineered how to make levels of Doom 1, the very first custom WAD. It's completely handwritten in March. Holy cow, okay. I don't know what Doom BSP source code is. I'm assuming that's the level editor code. Hackers had reverse engineered how to make levels for Doom 1. The very first custom WAD was completely handwritten in March. So basically the first WAD that was traded and shared among people was made completely by scratch and not with the source code given out by Carmack. While DEU was released a few weeks later, which was able to build BSP nodes. And I'm gonna guess DEU is also something that's tied to the level editor. Okay, so DEU is the unofficial level editor. Okay. Huh. So it was not a day one release where the level editor was source code was released. I mean, I'm sure Keen itself is relevant. I know the history behind Keen. I know the significance of Keen itself, but there are other games I want to play before that. They just pull the asses thinking and create this stuff and make their wands. Oh, interesting. Internal editor was released 2015. When I was reading the book, apparently it said that Carmack released the official source code information when it came to the level editor for Doom, and Jay Wilbur was very, very not happy about this because he was like very concerned about the business and basically protecting their money and their income when it came to the product they were making. And they had quite a bit of a disagreement when it came to the subject because Carmack was focused again on just trying to get good programs out there to give people the tools to program. And yeah, the information how to create levels was released, but the actual editor was released much later. Okay. Because I do know that Carmack conceded where he wasn't giving the actual source code for the engine out, but he was determined to give out the level editor specifically for Doom. You're possibly conflating the level editor with the Linux version of the game engine. I mean, possibly. I'm going off of what was said in the book, that when the game was released, Carmack was dead set on releasing the source code for the level editor so that people could have the official tools for creating levels to make it easier to create levels and share it with other people. But he agreed he would not give the source code out for the entire engine and the game itself, because that is what they needed to protect the game. Maybe they weren't as descriptive with what versions it was, but that's just all I remember when read, and that was the notes that I'd taken. Was Linux a thing back in 1993? Well, because I know Windows was a thing in 1998, 96. Absolutely it was. Okay. I know almost nothing about Linux. Almost nothing about Linux. I'm glad there are other people in here who know quite a bit about Doom on the original days to contribute some more to this as well. Okay. So, as I said before, Tom was very dedicated to creating and injecting some type of story into Doom. So he went and created something that was known as the Doom Bible. So over the course of 2 months, Tom wrote a game design document that was outlined for the game included things like characters, their backstories, the enemies, the weapons, the levels, a press release they would give, the story outline, and even more, and it all capped out at 79 pages long. Unfortunately, this design document didn't change anyone's minds, and the rest of the team still thought that the story for the game was unimportant. Carmack said that the experience was about fight or flight, and the player just needed to be scared. They didn't need to know specifically why. And Romero believed that you don't need much of a storyline if your gameplay is good. So not only did the team not budge on the idea of adding more narrative, but the entire document also had to pretty much be thrown away in the trash, as Carmack let Tom know at this time that because of unforeseen limitations with memories, they would have to go back to a level-based system for the game, since they wouldn't be able to do one large contiguous world. So 2 months of work was pretty much trashed. Trying not to discourage Tom too much, and instead guide him in the right direction, Carmack suggested Tom go to the library and look up images of military bases in hopes of finding a more concrete direction and art style for the game. After the fruits of Tom's labor in researching the bases turned up empty and the team pivoted hard into the concept level that Romero had designed, Tom was feeling really distant with the team, as no one seemed to agree with any of his creative decisions. And around this time, Tom had found a new girlfriend, and because of all these disagreements, Tom was finding himself spending less and less time at the office and more time with his girlfriend. So a short time after this, the team had asked Tom for his resignation, and he was very upset with this at first, but realized it was for the best. So he resigned and he went to return back to Apogee, their previous publisher, and he worked with them. So Tom had left the company, and with Tom gone, there really was no one left on the team at all pushing for any type of narrative in Doom. So because of that, we were left with very little story that the game actually had. I'm dead tired. No, I understand, Arctic. It's late. I don't blame you. I'll be uploading the discussion on YouTube, or you could watch the VOD. Up to you. So, Tom had left the company, and that's pretty much it in terms of the story. There was really no further development in the designing of the story. But we're going to rewind just a little bit real quick to talk about the last major contributions that Tom had to the direction and the final results of Doom. So we're going to talk a little bit about the art style and the level design of Doom. No, I completely agree as well, Arctic. That's why I can't really watch VODs of people's streams. That's why I like being there for the live discussion. So for the art style, Tom was, as we said, was directed by Carmack at one point to go look into army and military bases and the structures and the architecture of them to get a better idea of how they could design the world of Doom, because it was supposed to take place on military bases on Mars. And after a few months of research, Tom was guiding the aesthetic of the environment with his new information on military bases, but it wasn't quite turning out as planned. Rooms were bland and gray. Were bland with gray walls. The floors were very basic brown tiles. Lots of rooms had tables and office chairs and cabinets in them. And you really can't blame Tom when you look at the types of images you come across when you're based on the instructions Carmack gave him. When you just look at military bases, they're not exactly very interesting looking structures. But the problem was, aside from the bland aesthetic, Romero had a suspicion that Tom was just appeasing Carmack by making it a military base, but while also still trying to stick to his original design document as much as possible. Also, real quick, just want to talk about this real quick. In the original early designs of the game, there was a lot. These images right here, these are beta designs. Might even be alpha images of Doom itself gameplay footage, and they had the idea of having a ton of UI taking up a big chunk of the screen, because their idea was if they only have to show the game on 60-70% of the screen, that would be less rendering. It would make it so the game would run even quicker as well. They were able to make it so that the entire screen was showing the entire game and make it run quick as well. But in the early days, man, it was all about that speed, all about making sure the game ran fast. But as I said, Romero had the sneaking suspicion that maybe Tom was just appeasing Carmack by making a military base, but still trying to stick to the original design document as much as possible. In the design document, you could see that one of the original ideas was the game was supposed to start off when you'd be playing cards with a group of other soldiers, and then the demons would come in and start killing the other players and your teammates right around you. And in the early designs, when Romero was guiding the art direction, it had tables with cards. It had the filing cabinets and all the other things that were inside the design documents. So Romero was really worried that Tom doing this was negatively impacting the game and would negatively impact the final result of the game. So Romero decided to take a couple days to himself to create his own level with an idea of what he thought Doom could look like. So he made the level, and he showed it to the team, and they were all pretty much blown away with what they saw, and they agreed that they would drop all levels that Tom had worked on and the art direction that Tom had been working on, and would make future levels look more like Romero's. I can completely understand and see why Tom got the fuck out of there. Oh god, that would be horrible if he spent like months making a design document because they were directed, we're gonna make this type of game, and then after 2 months they go, oh, by the way, we made this change and now we can't do it, so that entire 2 months of work is garbage. So why don't you go spend a couple months in the library, look at images of these military bases, and come back with something. And then they go and you do that, and then you come back, you start making the game like that, and someone takes like 3 days just making a different level, and everyone goes, oh yeah, fuck that, this is way better, we're doing this, your shit's in the trash. Like, I don't blame Tom. God, that must have been an awful time period to work. Actually, funny you say that, Deed. I was just about to bring up Sandy. Doom 2 map 10 is a Tom Hall design. Interesting. Really? Which episode? I'm assuming it's episode map 10. Yeah, that definitely is a little bit more bland of an aesthetic. Huh. Wow, I didn't know that. That's wild. That's cool. And here I didn't even release. It was that late. Yeah, no time. Yeah, time creeps up on you. So after Tom left, he was replaced by Sandy, and Romero and Sandy would become the 2 members of the team that would actually create the levels for Doom itself. Romero's level design philosophy revolved around a cascade of small battles usually. So you would kill a few enemies, travel a short distance, push up a wall that would unleash a new horde of enemies. You would succeed that encounter, and then a new wave would be unleashed. They were usually raw and brutal with little downtime. But when there was downtime, Romero really strongly believed in giving players a ton of options and lots of places to explore. So Romero said that he had learned how important exploration was in video games from the original Zelda games. So you would go through, defeat the enemies, and then if you kind of felt like you just wanted to break from the octane action, you could then back up and then go and explore, look for any kind of different pathways or secrets to find in them. At the player's discretion, they could choose to leave whenever they wanted to. It was pretty great. Whereas in contrast, Peterson's levels were much more strategic. They usually rewarded players who didn't just point and shoot, instead thought before taking action. One of his trademark designs was that if you didn't blow up a barrel at the right time, the player would become swarmed and usually overwhelmed with monsters. Sandy's levels were usually more ugly in comparison with Romero's levels, but the team agreed that Sandy's levels were always fun. And the team also agreed that the 2 distinct styles of the level design complemented each other very, very well. So that's the majority of the actual level design aspect, the transition of Tom going into Sam. So let's talk about the actual art style itself after, let's talk about the art style itself. So finally we get to talk about Adrian. Adrian got right to work. Oh, sorry. Like I said before, Doom was the game that Adrian had really, really wanted to make for a long, long time. Because of his whole experience working in hospitals, and this was his chance to go and create the type of artwork he had wanted to create it for so long. So Adrian got right to work creating the sketches for the enemy concept art. And once completed, this would normally be the part in the process where the designers or the artists would take the artwork and turn it into sprite form on the computer. But Adrian being the artist he is, and Carmack being the programmer he is, they decided to approach this a little bit differently. So after the design artwork was done for the different characters, Adrian got to work sculpting clay models of all the enemies, and Carmack got to work on a program. Once all the sculptures were done, what they would do is they would take the sculpture and they would place it on a Lazy Susan, and with a program that Carmack had made, they would snap the 8 different pictures of the model at different angles to create a full 360-degree image of the model itself. Then with the program, they would take those models, they would digitize it, pixelate it, and then color them with the color palette available to the engine at the time. And then they repeat this entire process for every single character, every single enemy. And they would also do it with the models in different states of motion as well. So they would take the 360-degree profile image of the monster, the enemy, and what they would do is they would take the clay model and they would manipulate it. So it would basically have the illusion of it being motion. So they would have it in its standard form, and then they would have it with its arm raised, and then they would put on the Susan and they would rotate it and take the 8 images, and then they would move the arm even more to look like it was continuing the throw, and then put on the Susan and then take 8 images and then have it go to the end of the throw animation. And they would do this for all different movement animations for all the different characters. Apparently, they said they will never do this again because they had to worry about having the lights on the clay, which would cause them to sometimes start melting. And because of the models being of clay, as they were trying to move them around, it would start to lose its shape and start falling apart sometimes. So while they said that it was a fun experience, they will never do it again. But it's also the reason why they were able to create such fantastic sprite work and models for the enemies in the game. It was great. So Adrian would also be able to lean further into the more gruesome aspects of the artwork that he wanted to do with the overkill scenarios. So enemies in the game regularly would die, their innards would fall out, or their bodies would fall into piles on the floor. But if an enemy reached a certain threshold of damage past the 0 health mark, then they would get an extra death animation and an extra sound effect that would play that would be extra gruesome. That was again feed into Adrian's artistic desires. And the same effect would also happen for the players themselves. If they died past a certain threshold, they too would scream. Between stop motion rotoscoping, basically, I've never heard of, I never would have imagined that a game in that early point would actually do a system like that to scan the models in. It was absolutely fascinating. So cool to hear. They used the same program that they used to scan in the models. They did that for the weapons in the game as well. They went to Toys R Us and they got a mass of different weapons. They got their own toy shotgun. They got a toy pistol. They even borrowed Tom's girlfriend's chainsaw at one point. Brought them back to the studio, stuck their arm in front of the camera holding the different weapons and scanned them in for the process as well. And that's how they introduced all the different weapons into the game. They would sometimes, you know, edit and modify them a little bit. I think they did that for the ray gun. They got some toy and they kind of like put some extra things onto it to put it into the game as well to make it look like a ray gun. They even went as far as to use this process for some of the textures in the game too. One day when Kevin Cloud, one of the other artists, came into work one day with a bloody knee wound, they scanned an image of his knee, and the ending result was something that was used for a wall texture in the game. I think they kept in the memorabilia for make the clay versions of the demons. You think that they kept the clay models that they used for the monsters somewhere? I've never heard about that. I did not know about that. That's pretty cool. That'd be fucking wild to see. If you have a link for that, I would love to see that. So, moving on from the art and the art direction and the level design, it's really funny too because I keep going into these things and I feel like we're just kind of I feel like we're blazing through all these different subcategories, but it's just one of those things. The team was like what, 8 people? It was the 4 main people that was replaced by Sandy, so that was 4. They had like Jay Wilbur for business. They had Kevin Cloud for the other artists to help them. It was like 7 people roughly working on the team. So you just had less people, less creative issues. These people were all working together and they were in their prime and they were making the game that they wanted to pretty much, except for Tom, but he was out of the picture relatively quickly. And again, this was an earlier time period in gaming where this game was able to be created and completed relatively quick and early. So Yeah, I feel like when compared to other discussions we have different games, I feel like I stay on a topic for a lot longer, whereas this is more topics in a shorter time period on each of them. But that's just because things were able to get done so quickly with this game. That's just the nature of the time period. So let's talk about the sales plan that Doom had, because Doom had a very interesting sales plan. It in general just followed a very interesting sales plan that they did for them games. So every game that it had made on their own time was published and distributed by... Where did my Apogee image go? Did I heck up? Dang, that's the wrong image. What happened? My images got hecked up. Dang, rip. Oh well. Every game that it had made themselves on their own time was published and distributed by Apogee. If you go and you look up id Software and you look at their list of games, a lot of the games that are listed on there you probably don't recognize, you don't know, or haven't heard of, and a lot of them are published by Softdisk. The guys at id, they all met at a company called Softdisk. It was a company that had a subscription service where people would subscribe and they would receive monthly discs in the mail that would include different software. These were usually things that would be for email or for taxes or for just a random assortment of software that you could install onto your computer back in the early days, because again, the internet was not a ubiquitous thing. People would basically sign up for these services. They would mail them to their houses, and once a month they would have these new programs to install on the computer. Carmack, both of the Johns, Carmack and Romero, were hired on to create games to add to the subscription service, and Adrian and Tom were just working at the company originally, working on creating products for the software monthly. When the Carmacks were there and when id Software had founded, they were making game for Softdisk, and they had a monthly obligation due to contract where they had to create games for Softdisk for that. And this also continued after they officially left Softdisk, and they had many games that were made that were just, they would make the game, it would be given to Softdisk, and that was part of their contract. That's what they had to do. Whereas games that was made specifically by id themselves, developed on their own time, and then sent out to be sold where id would be making their own money, these games were distributed and published by Apogee. And the first games that it had made, the Commander Keen games as well as Wolfenstein games, were done as shareware. Shareware is essentially giving a basic version of a product with the hopes that the user will enjoy the product, want the rest of the features, the rest of the full thing, and then will pay for the rest of it. So something like WinZip or LimeWire, basically it would be a free software people would download, have features that they liked, and if the person liked the program, they would pay for the rest of it. This was something that was frequently, and it was pretty much exclusively used for software itself. No one had really attempted to do anything for it when it came to video games, and id was one of the first ones to do it when they did it with Commander Keen. Commander Keen was basically, they would give one game out for free, and then they would hoping that people would really, really love the games, become addicted, and want the rest of them, so they would pay for the other two games. Same thing would happen with Wolfenstein. They would do one episode, and then which was like 7-8 levels, and then they would hope that the players would like it enough that they would want to pay for the other levels. This was the general model that id did for their games, and it was very no one expected it to be as successful as it did, because other developers had tried to do something similar where they would release the game entirely for free and hope that, you know, gamers would just pay for it, thinking that it deserved the money, but no one did that. And the shareware model proved to be very, very successful. They kind of like fast forward a little bit here. So at the start of Doom's development itself, its games were at the top of the shareware charts, not just the shareware game charts, the shareware charts in general. The top 3 games in terms of shareware were Wolfenstein 3D and the 2 Commander Keen games. And then the 4th game to come in on the list was a game that Apogee themselves had created, something called Duke Nukem. I haven't heard of that. Right before Doom's development, the team at id caught wind of some kind of disappointing information, and that was apparently Apogee wasn't doing the best job at keeping up with distribution. A man by the name of Sean Green, who was an employee at Apogee and had become friends with John Romero, he told John that the customers were complaining because they couldn't order a copy of the games they wanted that were made by id. It turns out a lot of the hirees at the company were just college kids who were hired from a sign that was hung up at a computer store that said, "Can you handle talking on the phone while playing video games for $6 an hour?" So they were clearly kids who were just kind of sitting there playing video games for money, and the phone line was the second thing that they kind of cared about. There wasn't even a computer system to log any of the orders. Every order was just written down on scraps of paper and then stuck on a spike. So with this information at this point, it was feeling pretty confident that they could handle they were confident in their abilities, that they could figure out how to handle publishing their own games. So why give up 60% of their profits to another company if that other company wasn't even doing a good job when it came to keeping up with demand? So with this new information, id Software decided to split from Apogee, and the split was surprisingly amicable. As Scott Miller, the owner of Apogee, expected the id guys to split eventually, he was just happy that the relationship had lasted as long as it had in the first place. And while id was definitely topping the charts with every release, id wasn't relying entirely on, Apogee wasn't relying entirely on id. Apogee had started creating their own works that were finding success, as the Duke Nukem game, as I listed, and also id wasn't the only developers Apogee was publishing games for. There were some other programmers that Apogee could rely on, like a new up-and-coming programmer by the name of Tim Sweeney, and his then, oh my god, my images are so fucked up. I don't know what happened. That's disappointing. There it is. By the name of Tim Sweeney. And his new up-and-coming company called Epic Mega Games. So it was happy to publish Doom themselves so that they could reap all the profits. I feel like I missed this section. Oh yeah, I totally skipped over the multiplayer aspect. Whoops, that's what happened. That's why my images got hecked up. I totally skipped over the multiplayer part. We'll have to go back to that afterwards. Was it my images? I fucked up. All right. I'll go back and do that after we finish with this section. Yeah, Epic Mega Games. I haven't heard of them either. Pfft, man, Apogee probably got really fucked after that one. Ditching id with all, and then sticking with all these no names. Tim Sweeney, Epic Mega Games, Duke Nukem. Never even heard of these things. So again, id was happy to publish Doom themselves so they could reap all of the profits. And they were going light on the advertising, expecting most of the sales to come for the game from word of mouth, excitement built just like their previous games. And they also expected the majority of the game's success to be carried by the game shareware model, again, as most of the previous games had. They only took out one advertisement in a single gaming magazine. This part drives me nuts because, again, the book apparently has been very accurate. Both the Romeros have, both of the Johns have talked about how the book is accurate. So I trust and believe that there was only one advertisement in a single gaming magazine that they took out to advertise Doom originally. I can't find the fucking magazine. There's tons of magazine advertisements for Doom. I could not figure out which original first, that one advertisement. I could not find an image for it, and I could not find at the very least what magazine it was. If it was one of those things where like, oh, this is a defunct magazine, like I would believe that was 1993. But oh god, I could not find the actual name of the magazine. I could not find a screenshot of the advertisement or anything. So if anyone knows anything about that, please help sate my mental insanity with this. This is what he looks like. Oh, I know. I'm memeing. Don't you worry. Everyone knows about Duke Nukem. So they were going very light. They only took out advertisement in one magazine. But the team did something very, very unheard of in the shareware market when publishing Doom this time. So normally what would happen if a company were to create and sell a shareware product, if they were selling it inside a retail store, if they were selling a distributor, what they would do is they would create the demo product, whatever it was. So this would be the bare bones version that people would play or use and hopes that the consumer would enjoy it, to contact the original creator to give them money to get the full product. That demo version, they would sell that to distributors, in this case a retail store, and then the distributor would purchase it. They would sell it in their stores, and for each sale in the store, they would kick back a certain percentage that would go back to the original person who sold the product, the demo, to the distributor. It was usually a decent percentage, and apparently the reason why this worked is because it wasn't an expirable product. It wasn't. It would take up very, very little space, and computers were a growing, booming business. So retailers were happy to do this. It was basically just taking up shelf space, and it would make money, even if it wasn't a whole lot. id was giving the demo product of Doom to retailers for free. They were not asking for a percentage of kickback back to id, and they were going to let the retailers keep the entire profit themselves. Id was not concerned. They did not care about the money they'd make from the percentages in sales in retail of the demo. They knew the majority of their money was going to come from people who would play the demo and want the full game afterwards from id. Id just wanted, more than anything, to get the game out in front of as many people's faces as possible. Jay, again, id's business manager, told the retailers to take the money they would have kicked back to id and just use that money to advertise the hell out of the game. They're like, listen, we were the ones who made Wolfenstein. This game was huge. We have hyped this up and people are excited for it. I guarantee if you advertise this game, it will fly off the shelves. Retailers were more than happy to sell a product from a proven developer that they wouldn't have to pay money for or royalties for sales in their stores. So there were many takers when it came to this. Absolutely fucking wild. And there's no way to know for sure directly how much this correlated to sales and success, but you can better fucking believe it probably contributed quite a bit, because I mean that's part of the reason why it was able to get on the market in the first place, is because they were one of the new ones to try this new shareware model when it came to video games, and it went over famously. So it was probably the exact same thing, the same exact result when it came to this different type of shareware model. So all right, let's rewind a little bit, because I accidentally skipped over the multiplayer aspect of the discussion I wanted to talk about. So multiplayer is something that's not new at all in video games. Even going back to 1972, Pong had a 2-player head-to-head mode. It has been there basically since the beginning. Arcade cabinets would have 2-player options as a very common staple. And even in the 1983, this is where this image comes from. Even in the 1983 release Mule, it was a game that was released for the Atari. This had up to 4 players could play it. It was basically like a very early Civilization game where you and 3 other players would pick plots of land to purchase and gather its resources, while also balancing the ability to do so with things like having the right equipment, money, and energy to do it. I bring this up because multiplayer games were still expanding, they were still growing, and they were still common coming on the Sega Genesis. But I also found out something very interesting. Classic case of Bader-Meinhof phenomenon, where once I learned about this game, its existence and what it was, I heard it while just doing one of my other casual research dives that I do. I was learning about Pikmin, and I found out that apparently this game was a massive inspiration for Miyamoto when he was making Pikmin, because Mule is a game where you use dozens of different robotic mules to extract resources from an alien planet. And Mule even has a creature called the Mountain Wumpus that when players would hunt it down, if they succeeded, they would gain extra resources, just like how Pikmin has the Flint Beetles, those little things that scurry around. You have to throw the Pikmin on top of them and land it on them. And if Pikmin players were successful hunting down the beetle and getting it, they were rewarded with extra nectar and pellets as a result. And I thought it was absolutely hilarious that I researched this game, Mule, and it just happened to come up in another game's history. I'd never fucking heard of this before, but basically multiplayer games were something that were very, very common, and they were still growing in popularity and were not something that were losing any kind of interest. In January 1993, about 3 months into the development of Doom, it put out a press release to announce Doom. In the list of features, they talked about everything Doom would be able to do. This included texture mapped worlds, non-orthogonal walls, diminished lighting, and even a multiplayer mode. It believed that with the internet and home computers becoming more and more common in households, that multiplayer games would become more and more important as time went on. God, were they right? So from the very start, multiplayer was planned, even though they only expected about 10% of players to use it. They wanted, basically, it wanted the experience making multiplayer games now for when it became important in the future. The thing is, most of the things that were listed on that list during the press release had started to take shape in some way or been implemented in the game to an extent before the press release was made, but multiplayer hadn't been worked on yet. That was announced in January. Fast forward to November. This would be a month before Doom's release. Carmack went into Romero's office and told him that he had done enough work that the team could finally get to work on the multiplayer aspect of the game. Around this time, Mortal Kombat, as I mentioned before, had been released. This was finally on home console, and Street Fighter 2 had taken the world by storm. There were tons and tons of multiplayer games that were still very common and very important, and there were high-acting multiplayer games like the Mortal Kombat and fighting games, but none of them had any kind of high-octane, fast, violent shooters where players could kill each other, and that was basically Doom's niche was filling in and being the first game to do just that. So within 2 weeks of Carmack telling Romero that he had it ready, he had managed to connect two computers in the office to each other over the network and got the multiplayer up and running. Romero was absolutely over the moon with this experience and loving every second of the competitive games that the id guys were having with each other. Romero compared these types of games to almost like a type of boxing match, but the goal wasn't simply to just knock the players out, it was to actually kill them. It was a match to the death. It was then that he decided to call this mode and coin the ubiquitous term in gaming, deathmatch. So let's add that to the list of other things that Doom had been the one to create. Deathmatch is now one of them as well. At first, the multiplayer was strictly supposed to be just players versus players, but Romero realized as fun as it was to mow down all of your friends, it would be amazing to cooperatively gun down hordes of demons with your friends. So when Romero pitched this idea, Carmack said it was possible, and he implemented it as well. Just another one of those examples to, as I said before, Romero and Carmack worked very well together. Romero would see what tools Carmack had created, find or think of possible creations that could be done with it, and ask Romero if it was ask Carmack if it was possible, and Carmack would take up the challenge. Also, really, really funny, again, to just look at the time period where a month before the release of the game, Carmack's like, hey, we can finally get started on that multiplayer thing that we promised, and Romero's like, oh yeah, forgot about that, and fucking 2 weeks later, they have a brand new feature ported into the game and fully functioning. 2 weeks before the release of the game, not an issue. God, different fucking time in gaming. So then we talked about the sales plan. How Doom did their sales plan, very different and to much success. Now, this is the part where I normally talk about what was groundbreaking about the game we discuss in this series. However, that's just kind of the whole discussion itself. We talked about the engine, how it's groundbreaking. We talked about the multiplayer, how it's groundbreaking. We talked about just about everything about this game was kind of groundbreaking. It's part of the reason why I don't really like doing games from this time period, because just about everything that they do in these games is groundbreaking, for better or for worse. So we're gonna skip over that because that would be repeating the entire thing. So let's just talk about how the game itself was influential. There's no online, just local multiplayer. I read that the game had 4-player local and then 2-player internet, whereas like 4 people you need to have direct wire connections to the computers, whereas 2-player could have over network. Oh, you could do 4-player over the internet. Wow, that's right. I heard something about Duango briefly in my research, but that was kind of dipping into the researching of just the history of the internet itself. I'm like, this is a whole nother fucking can of worms I'm not worried about right now. So let's talk about what about Doom is influential. This is much more subjective. This is obviously not based strictly in fact like some of the other things are, and I say strictly in fact, all of this stuff, all of this information I'm giving, and just when it comes to game development in general, unless there is a camera, I want to get this out there because this is something that's kind of drives me nuts about when it comes to research, when it comes to games, when it comes to research, when it comes to like scientific research, it's the laws of physics. You do a test, you get the results, and if it's repeatable, then you know that it's true. When it comes to game design and when it comes to game development, all this stuff is basically word of mouth. This is all people's different takes and the people who worked on the game relaying that information to people. So when I say that all this stuff is quote unquote factual, it's totally possible that, you know, someone misremembers something. This stuff happened 20 fucking years ago. 30 years ago almost. Granted, this book came out in 2005, but probably I think the interview started in 2000, so it was about 10 years old at that point. But still, there is going to be some mix-ups. There is going to be maybe someone in the future, one of the developers will say something that contradicts something that happened in the past. So I did my research as best as I could, and I promise this is as accurate as I could make it. I double checked everything that I could, but some of this stuff isn't all it's as factual as it can be. This part where I talk about what I believe is influential, this is purely based on opinion. This is what I think is aspects of Doom itself that is carried on into other parts of gaming as well. And I'm sure there are many more besides these. These I just think are the more major parts. I know about GameSpy, but like I know of GameSpy. Was that? I don't think it was a magazine. Was it a website? Oh, this thing. Wow, I've seen this logo before. Huh. That's wild. It's almost like an equivalent to like Xbox Live, wasn't it? This is kind of like a middleman thing that would connect different players to each other, huh? Wow. That's crazy. Yeah, GameSpy was before my time. I mean, it went defunct in 2013, but I didn't play Xbox Live until like 2008, 2009, roughly. No, it was long. I think it was like 2010. It was. I didn't play online games until much later. So, okay. So on to the actual influential part. Obviously, the main thing that Doom is known for being influential is the kickstarting the FPS genre. One of the biggest genres in gaming right now was established by Doom. Again, we talked about it. Doom was not the first FPS, but it was the one that really solidified the basis for the formula. For years, there would be many copycat games that would come out imitating the success of Doom because of its huge success itself. Current day times have seen a resurgence in a game architecture much more similar to Doom in a subgenre called the boomer shooter, which I think is fucking hilarious. But it's even with all the advancements and changes to the FPS genre over the years, there's still a desire from developers to create games in a similar style to the original Doom formula. And on top of developers, there's also a market for consumers who still want new games in the similar style to the original Doom. So not only did Doom kickstart the FPS genre that would become arguably the for a time period was definitely the #1 genre in the video game market and could arguably be seen as still the top dog in the market. There's still people who are going back and creating and buying new games that are built in a very, very similar style to Doom and how it was built in the earlier days. I mean, again, fucking 30 years later almost, it's still a winning formula that people love. Something that's hugely influential from Doom is the weapon loadout system. While it has changed a bit over time, Doom's weapon layout was the originator of the 1 to 9 weapon loadout, and most around have stuck since then. There's most common 1 to 9 weapon loadouts include a melee weapon, a pistol, a shotgun, some automatic gun, a rocket launcher, and some overpowered low ammo screen clearing weapon. These 6 weapons are very common staples for shooters that allow players to cycle through 1 through 9, and 6 of these 7 weapons were in Doom's toolkit. The only one I couldn't, I mean, there's the ray gun, and I'm sure depending on the genre, if there is an inclusion ability to include the ray gun, it very frequently happens, but I couldn't think of maybe the flamethrower, but flamethrower is still limited in range. That's right, this is the song that plays with the bunny. But as a whole, this list has stuck around in shooters that have the multiple option layout, weapon loadout. The only outlier really is the chainsaw, which is more often than not becomes the equivalent to some kind of power up. I mean, the chainsaw is meant to be an extremely powerful burst, short range, point blank kind of weapon. That's kind of equated to usually some kind of power up in a lot of those types of games, or almost as a stealth kill. I think is kind of comparable because stealth kills will usually be coming up behind very close range and killing them. Chainsaw would have a very similar effect as well. So, but the 1 to 9 layout clearly finds origin in Doom, even though Doom was originally 1 through 7. Doom was the game with no reloads at all, but I wasn't sure. I thought about talking about that too, but I meant to research it. Was there any other kind of games that had any kind of, I mean, Doom was the original FPS, but I wasn't sure if that was more of a limitation, if that was a design choice because they wanted to keep things going faster or what. I thought about that too, about the whole no reload aspect. But something hugely influential as well was Doom was a major point for ditching of arcade elements. So the team thought that Doom was very modern and advanced compared to previous games that came out before it, and because of this they wanted to leave behind mechanics tied to arcades for more modern game design decisions in their opinion. So a couple of them, one of them would be lives. Arcade systems were designed to be quarter munchers. They were designed to trigger the fail state very easily, but still be fun in the process, so you'd want to continue paying and continue playing. With Doom, you own the game. They didn't really see much reason to give you a type of live system, and the game itself was going to be incredibly difficult, and they expected the players to die a lot. Adding a lives and game over system seemed completely unnecessary and archaic, and just something specifically for arcade systems didn't need to belong in the game. Doom got rid of the score system. In beta versions of the game, you can actually see collectibles to pick up on the ground like the ones that exist in Wolfenstein. Wolfenstein did have a score system where you get collectibles for score. One of the big draws to arcade games was the lasting appeal and bragging rights that you earned when you got on the high scoreboard. And Doom being a game you owned wouldn't benefit as much from that. I mean, you could compete against your own time, but the bragging rights weren't quite there. And they felt that, again, since arcades were a public thing, whereas the games you owned at home didn't, were something that you usually only saw yourself, they saw high scores and score systems kind of as a artifact left over from arcades as well. From a game design standpoint, the team felt it would not make sense in the game world itself to find collectibles for score. Yes, hell was invading, but they were in the process of invading. Why exactly would they have treasure troves and money and other goodies to leave around the map for the player to pick up and find? So they decided to can that. To keep some sort of mechanic in the game to track in progress who was better, they added a par score time as well as a completion meter. Excuse me. And the other thing they decided to get rid of was starting over from the beginning. Similar to a live system, this was mostly a leftover from the arcade days. However, this mechanic was brought over to home console for a different reason. The game over, the fail state sense was to try to get players to pay more money to continue playing, whereas when consoles were brought home, because they were a lot of money to buy the console as well as the games themselves, games were made incredibly difficult and had very punishing fail states that usually started you over from the beginning to make it so that if you were spending a lot of money, you would basically get more playtime and more value out of the purchase. But again, as stated before, the game was expected to be very difficult already, and having a permanent reset for a fail state seemed overly punishing. Going back to what Tom Hall said originally, he liked the feel. He believed that the feeling of completing a level was a very good feeling, a nice little checkpoint of progress. And they didn't like the idea of a player having to start back on mission 1 when they die 80% roughly through an entire episode. To make sure that fail states still had some sort of punishment, they decided to make the weapon start over from the beginning of the level just with a default weapon loadout. Wow, I didn't know it was that late in development. Holy cow. Wow, that's really late. I didn't even know it had lives. Lives are something I had no idea about. I knew they had a score system and they got rid of. Did not know lives were in the game at all. Wow. Pistol starting every level though. Fuck that noise. Kudos to the people who can do it. I am not one of those people. All right. So that is, again, there is more to talk about that could be considered influential. Those were the major things that I've seen that really changed the direction of game design and video games as a whole. The dropping of a lot of arcade mechanics. Again, someone has to be the one to do it, and Doom's phenomenal success showing that a game without those could exist, I think heavily guided developers that way. Of course, the creation of the FPS genre is massive beyond words and is still today. Weapon loadouts is still one of the core the weapons that they had for their weapon loadouts for games that do have weapon loadouts 1 to 9. That's still the blueprints in most cases. So again, there's more to say about what was influential, but those I thought were the big takeaways. So I've been talking for about 2 hours. I'm getting like a tickle in the back of my throat. I'm gonna take a short break. I'm gonna get some tea. I'm gonna get a snack. I'll be back in like 10 minutes or so, and then we'll continue. Next thing we'll talk about is the reception to Doom. From what I understand, Doom was very big, but Quake also had like some kind of almost like official support for it in a way, because Doom had a part-time. Yeah. I believe Quake was the really big one. Quake had it in a way, but I think Quake was the really big one that started to push it forward. Quake done quick? I had no idea. Wow, that's cool. Anyway, yes, I'll be back in about 10 minutes. Okay. Well, I'm back. Let's hop back into this discussion. Good song to start off the return of the discussion with, too. Okay. Oh, that's actually adorable little combo. That's so good. All right. So, talked about development of Doom, Doom itself, games that came out around the time period of it. We can talk about how it's influential. Yeah, I had like this was supposed to cycle through different wallpapers. And we'll do that. That ain't too bad. All right. Let's talk about the actual reception to Doom. So, first and foremost, normally what I like to do is I first and foremost like to talk about the reception to it in terms of like review scores. And I know a lot of people aren't a fan of review scores. I just like to use review scores for this because I feel like it's a very simple, basic, but good general idea of what the perception to the game is as a whole. So what I like to do is I go to Metacritic, which if you don't know, Metacritic just, takes all the scores, averages them out. And if a game does not give, if a major reviewer does not give an actual number score for it, what they do is they go through, read the review, and try to generate their own kind of score based off the review themselves, and then add that to the list. So in case anyone's curious, that's how that works. Normally it's not something that needs to be noticed or mentioned or brought up when talking about older games, because the idea of giving games no score is kind of like a new modern thing. But Doom's an older game. Doom, as I said, is a game that predates the ubiquitous nature of the internet in households. Therefore, game like websites like IGN, GameSpot, or any other major reviewing game sites were not a thing. So the closest thing that we had to getting reviews for this to aggregate them was there's a small handful of electronic focus magazines that had sections focused on video games where they would review games sometimes, and there was an even smaller handful of magazines that were mostly focused on video games that had reviews. Took a little while, but I managed to find an archive that had screenshots of magazines that reviewed Doom. Was able to look through them and average the scores out myself. So the archive magazine review scores averaged out to a score of 90. Doom got a 90. This was also, again, earlier times, so people weren't as critical for the good or for the bad. And also scores tended to more often than not be in round numbers on a scale of like 1 to 10. It was usually 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10. They weren't nearly as particular about their scores. So basically when it says 90, it's basically 9 out of a 10. It's basically one less than perfect for this older time period. So the game was very positively reviewed, with most people marveling at just how fast the game is, how beautiful it was, how gritty it was, and how satisfying it was in pretty much every aspect. And people were always talking about how they didn't like how satisfying it was because they thought there was something wrong with it. My, how times have changed. But yes, the review scores for the game were very, very positive, averaged out to about 90 out of 100. So we'll talk about the public reception about the game. And there's a couple things when it comes to the public reception about the game. We're going to talk about the public opinion first. So Doom became, and I mean this to as close to as literal as possible, a cult classic when it came out. People were disappearing for days at a time while playing this game. The game released during finals week for a lot of universities since it was released on December 10th. And it caused many students to end up failing their finals because they were so distracted. It was considered by many to be game of the year upon its release. It is considered by many people to be one of the greatest video games of all time. To this day, it is still avidly played by many players. And it wasn't all universal praise. I mean, at the time of its release, it was, at its time, a very extremely violent, very gory, and it was something that a lot of people had not seen, and they were completely disgusted by it. But when it came to the consumers, the people who actually bought, purchased, and played video games, it was universally lauded for the experience that Doom could only give. Nothing else could come close or give any kind of similar type of experience. To put it into perspective, when Doom came out, when Wolfenstein came out, and Wolfenstein was a lot slower compared to Doom, but Wolfenstein, when it came out, people were reportedly getting motion sickness. It was being referred to as virtual reality because it was so realistic at the time. that just blows my mind when you look at the quality of that game compared to modern day standards. But even just looking at Wolfenstein jumping up to Doom, if that game was considered virtual reality just because of how amazing and how fleshed out that game was, Doom was probably, I couldn't even imagine how mind-blowing that experience must have been for people when it came out. It really, it just seems like one of those things where you had to have been around when it came out to truly understand the marvel that game was. So that was the general public opinion. Now let's talk about something that everyone loves, a sure sign of something having a major impact on culture. Let's talk about government controversies. So when Doom came out, it was not inexperienced when it came to controversies. When Wolfenstein came out, it brought to light the legality of the internet. And at the time of release, any type of media that showed or portrayed any kind of Nazi imagery, like swastikas or anything like that, was immediately banned and not legal in Germany, was not allowed. So when Wolfenstein was out, it was legal in Germany. However, the game could be uploaded to internet bulletin boards where people could access them from Germany and then download the game themselves, effectively owning something that's illegal. And the German government was not very happy about this, and it really brought into question the legality of the internet, because it was legal in the United States and illegal in Germany, but someone could be able to upload something in another country that would be illegal in another and download it there. So it really brought into question, is the internet legal? And if so, what do we do about this? So when it came to controversies and governmental controversies, it was not inexperienced. However, when it came to the release of Doom, the matters were more pressing, were more close to home. At least somewhat recently. Really? What did they change? Excuse me, sorry. There were more pressing matters at home in the United States upon the release of Doom. So on December 1st, 1993, a Democratic senator by the name of Joseph Lieberman called a press conference to discuss the issues of entertainment. He believed it was growing more corrupt and twisted, and it was catering to the more violent and grotesque parts of humanity. Movies like Terminator 2 and Reservoir Dogs were raking in money at the box office, dominating the charts. Games like Mortal Kombat and Night Trap were at the top of every kid's Christmas list. What was even more alarming was that the Sega Genesis version of Mortal Kombat outsold the NES version 3-1. Reason being, the Sega Genesis version did not have any kind of censorship, whereas Nintendo requested some of the blood and gore be censored. So the version that had all the blood and guts were the ones that people wanted to buy and play more. This conference led to federal hearings calling in different spokesmen to the video game industry. This included Howard Lincoln, the executive vice president for Nintendo of America, as well as William White, the vice president of marketing and communications for Sega of America. I just want to say, this really pisses me off because this image is in HD. The one of William White is in HD. And this was taken when he was at the actual discussion. So all these images that were in HD, they existed. They were HD images at the time of 1993, and I couldn't find shit for this discussion. All these images were so fucking tiny. I also find it interesting that this was a Shutterstock image, a stock photo, but this based on the oh, you're talking about the legality of Nazi imagery. Gotcha. Oh, cool. I thought you were talking about the legality of things on the internet. I'm like, really? But they called these two gentlemen, and they essentially had to come forward and defend the video game industry as a whole. And the final result of these gatherings was that the video game industry would be given a year to create a separate third-party council that would give ratings for video games. If they did not do so within a year, then that would force the government's hand, and the government would have to intervene. This ruling was given on December 9th, 1993, and Doom came out December 10th, 1993, the very next day. A little over 9 months later, The first batch of games was rated, but well, about a little over 9 months later, the ESRB was founded, and on the day of its founding, it was it released its first batch of games. And Doom would make history to be one of the first games rated, as it was part of that batch. And it would also be the first game to ever receive an M rating. The Sega 32X version was the one that was rated, was given an M rating. And in case anyone is curious, the other small batch of games that was announced during this first package was Pitfall: The Mind Adventure for the SNES was rated T for Teen. Super Punch Out for the SNES was rated K to A. Sonic Triple Trouble for Sega Game Gear, fucking Sega Game Gear, was rated K to A. And Donkey Kong Country for the SNES was also rated K to A. Doom's constant references for politicians and white suburban moms everywhere for being the cause of decay in children wasn't the only negative association it would get. The shooters responsible for the Columbine massacre were also very avid Doom players. One of the shooters had a journal where he directly referenced Doom, saying that the two of them shooting up the school would be comparable to Doom. This connection would be a common talking point for people who were anti-video games and argue that video games are responsible for influencing children and teenagers to commit crimes and desensitize them to violence. It should go without saying, there has been no reputable or credible studies that show any connection between video games and acts of violence in the real world. Anyone else who says so is making this accusation on unfounded or baseless speculation. I also do want to take this time to note there were very strong rumors that the shooters for the massacre had created their own levels in Doom as recreations of the school to practice in. This is not true. One of the shooters did create custom levels in Doom and did share them online, and they can be found and played now if you so want to, but there has never been any evidence of a level made in the shape or to recreate the Columbine High School. That is not true. So now I guess we'll talk about the impact that Doom had on everyday life. The good old days of K to A. Isn't that still a rating? It's just really, really, really rare that anything gets it. Oh no, I think the K to A was replaced with like EA for or EC, early childhood, I think. For the week of Doom's release, government, university, and personal computer network speeds slowed to a crawl due to the sheer number of people downloading Doom, re-uploading it to other message boards, and simply just playing it on their network. At Carnegie Mellon, a university in Pennsylvania, the computer systems administrator had to post a notice letting everyone know that too many people were playing Doom on network mode, and it was slowing the entire university's network to a halt. They continued telling students that if anyone was found playing on the network, that they would be kicked off of the network. This is also, as I said before, during finals week, so internet access was extremely important for students. So not only was this launch awful because kids who were not gamers and did not play Doom were unable to access the internet, any students who wanted to study for their finals, if they were found playing on Doom, they would basically have their internet privileges revoked and no longer be able to access the internet. So that was a problem there. A computer lab supervisor at the University of Louisville created a special software that scanned through the computer's files in the system, and if it found Doom in it, it deleted it. This was because students apparently, quite literally, were sprinting into the lab, falling over each other just to get to the computers to play the games. The company Intel also had to ban the game in the company as it was found employees were playing it and just completely swamping their systems, being unable to do anything else. When Doom came out, pretty much for the week of its release, it shut everything down. Anything that had to do with computers had to deal with trying to get attention away from Doom. Basically, they were competing with people playing Doom. When Doom did their press release, I believe they said that they expect to be the #1 cause of work distraction, or #1 cause in nosedive and productivity. That's what it was. They expect to be the #1 cause of decreased productivity in businesses everywhere, and they certainly were at the beginning. Okay, it was replaced with E. Okay. So this is where I would talk about the sales of the game. But again, Doom was not in that butter zone. Just like when it comes to reviews, it's also not in the butter zone for sales either. So sales, when it came to games and their sales, too early in the life cycle for sales to be something that was very majorly tracked by most different companies or different distributors or retailers. And it was not too late where it's gotten to the point where the only way to know about sales of a game is if it sells very, very well and the publisher, the developer, the studio wants to brag about it. There's that little butter zone where things were actively, regularly tracked, and then information was readily available. Unfortunately, Doom was before that time. The only information that I have to gauge the sales of Doom was apparently upon the game's release, over $100,000 worth of orders was rolling in every single day. This game was making fat fucking stacks. Another way to kind of measure the success of Doom, John Romero, one of the programmers, left id Software shortly after the release of Quake for creative differences. And with the money that he had made on the Doom series, he was able to split off and create his own studio called Ion Storm. If you know anything about Ion Storm and the games he created, the first game he created was Daikatana. And that game has a very, let's say tumultuous development history. And I mean, the process of opening up a studio is expensive. And if you learn about what that game went through in development, it spent a lot of money and had tons of problems and was still able to keep the studio afloat afterwards. So they were making fucking stacks. And that was just Romero's money. The money was being split amongst the members of the team. They had insanely expensive cars like fucking Corvettes and everything. They were living large. They had the money was rolling in. This game sold phenomenally. So now this is the part where we talk about sequels. Doom has had some sequels, and Doom has been ported to every single platform and console imaginable. I mean, it's been ported onto calculators that have been running specifically with potatoes. It's even been ported onto every platform unimaginable. I'm sure everyone has also seen this GIF about the copy of Doom that was run on a pregnancy test. Yes, that was a real thing. Excuse me. So Doom has been on absolutely everything. But in terms of actual literal sequels, Doom did have a direct sequel that came out the following year after Doom's release, and that was Doom 2. This came out actually less than a year after the first one. After Doom 2, it worked on the Quake series for 3 entries before coming back and creating Doom 3. This game was very, very different, a huge departure from the typical classic Doom formula. And this one put a huge emphasis on story and dialogue. It was also less about skillful reactions and aiming amongst swaths of enemies, picking out the ones you need to kill, and it became more about creating a very creepy atmosphere, trying to scare players lurking in the shadows. Very, very polarizing reception from players and critics alike. After Doom 3, Doom 4 was a game that had been worked on for years and years, but was eventually restarted back to square one as the results of id. Id was getting summed up as saying it just basically didn't resonate Zoom didn't resonate Doom. Good lord, sorry. Probably for the best. At the time period of its development, Call of Duty and military type shooters were at their heyday. They were living large. They were doing very, very, very well. And so Doom was probably going the way of just being more of a typical military shooter type of game, and just with the aesthetic of hell taking over. But Doom 4 would be started over and eventually turn into Doom 2016. I'm so sorry, I'm like fumbling all over myself now. It was a game that had a really odd, very shaky launch and very questionable development. Just the development and launch of this game was very, very shrouded in mystery and made people extremely cautious. But once people actually got their hands on it, they realized, holy shit, this is Game of the Year material. This is fucking fantastic. And it was a wonderful revival of the series. This would lead into Doom Eternal, a follow-up direct sequel to Doom that was released earlier this year, actually. So Doom is still alive and well in the current modern day, with new entries coming out even today, as well as DLC for them. Now, for spin-off games, there was also quite a handful of them. One of them would be Final Doom. This was a game that came out after Doom 2 and consisted of 2 episodes containing 32 levels each. These were the 2 episodes that I was talking about earlier when we were talking about mods, how it created a budding community that created levels, and it had picked up a team who made 2 episodes to fully release it. Those were this was the game. Those 2 episodes were released on this. There was also Doom 64, which I only learned after doing the research for this, that was not made by id. I was going through and playing every single id Software game, and that's why I didn't play Final Doom, because I knew it wasn't made by id. It was just, you know, given the blessing, but wasn't made by them. I played Doom 64 thinking it was made by Doom. This was apparently just overseen by id, so I felt kind of dumb about that. Still a good game. But yeah, this was a game just supervised by them. And then we have Doom RPG and Doom 2 RPG. These were mobile RPGs slash FPSs on mobile. Actually, these were officially made by id, I'm pretty sure. They were apparently good for mobile games. Not bad, just not exactly what most people expect from Doom itself. So we're finally coming to a close at the end of Doom, the Doom discussion. Symbian OS. What is Symbian OS? So now, this is again my opinionated part. Excuse me. This is again where we get to the part that's about my opinion. This is what I believe we can learn about, what we can learn from Doom, what the industry can take away from Doom. The first smartphone operating system, was it really? I guess I never really thought about that. Just like I really haven't thought about what was the original operating system before Windows and Mac. That's kind of cool. Developed by Nokia, no surprise there. So, what can we learn from Doom? And one thing that we can learn is gameplay at the forefront, front and center. There is, let me repeat this, emphasize this. There is absolutely nothing wrong with story in a video game. It's actually very, very important. Having games that put a focus on narrative is how we got games like BioShock, Spec Ops: The Line, and of course Final Fantasy X. It's really, really important that we have these types of games and these types of experiences. But the thing is, games are interactive mediums, and they shine the best when they do what no other medium can do. And that's interact with them, that's play them, do something and get a direct result back that is a result of your action specifically. And Doom was a perfect example of this. There was no frills, there was no in between, just interactive gameplay the entire time. There's still obviously ups and downs, there's still highs and lows that breaks from all the action so that the action still has any meaning in the first place. But the downtime is focused on exploration, the players wandering the maps for secrets, something that can only be done in a video game. Then when the player is done and wants to go back to move on to the action, they have the power to do so at their own discretion. Everything about Doom was always about gameplay, whether you're either gunning down demons or you're going around exploring and trying to find new secret areas. Everything about Doom was about the gameplay first, and story was, you know, just kind of held together by a shoestring. And again, it's very, very important to have games that focus on narrative, but I think that it's a balance between the two. We need to have games that do put a focus on narrative, but there needs to be more games that focus, like the gameplay is front and center. The first example that I can think of in modern times of a game that did this was Manhunt, and I just fucking had so much fun with Manhunt from start to finish. It had like yeah, it had its like cutscenes, its basic intro cutscene, and it had cutscenes at the end of each chapter. But I mean, Doom kind of had the exact same thing. You know, at the end of each episode, when you completed the boss, you had that little shot screen that had like the text blurb afterwards that kind of explained it. But then you go right into the next episode. Manhunt had Manhunter, Maneater. God, fuck. I think it's Manhunter. I think it's Maneater. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's Maneater. I'm sorry. I was saying Manhunt. That's a different game. Maneater has the little cutscenes at the end of each chapter, but as a whole, like the vast majority of that game is just about fucking having fun, gameplay the entire time, action, and then when you want to take a break from the action, you just go and explore and look around and try to find some other things. It was a very similar outline. I fucking loved it, and I really, really love games that put an emphasis on the all of it being the actual gameplay. Because I think we have a ton of story-based games, and I think it's kind of people's reluctance. I feel like the idea that games need to have such a huge emphasis on story is kind of like a reaction to people saying that video games are so childish. They're just, you know, serotonin releasers. They're not actually about any kind of intelligence. And I feel like people reacted by putting an emphasis on story-based games. And I think they both exist within each other, but I love games that put an emphasis on the actual gameplay as number one. Thank you, Viper. Yeah, I'm actually pretty happy with the layout. It's gotten a lot better. Although this time I kind of fucked up with the images. They were slightly off center. So the other thing that I think game developers can learn from Doom would be the unique enemy design. Doom was low resolution at the time, and enemies that attack the player from far away is a very fast-paced game, and you need to be able to clearly know which there needs to be clear distinctions on which enemy is what at a glance, at a moment's notice. I typed that. Oh, I typed the wrong word there. Enemy designs are very, very distinct from each other in Doom. You look at them and you could tell, like, at a moment's notice, you can tell right away whether you're looking at an imp, whether you're looking at a soldier, whether you're looking at a cacodemon, and you know exactly what they're capable of, what they're going to do, and what you need to do to react against them. They even all have different sound cues because the enemies could be coming from behind you or behind a wall or off screen, and the player can then hear and react accordingly. Modern shooters, more often than not, I think tend to opt for a human setting and human enemies, and therefore they end up making the characters, the enemies, less distinct from each other and making them more generic. And I feel like as of late, this trend of unique characters has not been utilized nearly as much. I'm sorry. And then even when it comes to games that do follow a type of character archetype where they tend to be unique from each other and more distinct from each other, I still feel it's very cookie cutter as to what roles that they fill. There's the glass cannon character that's extremely quick and relatively small to hit, and then there's the big burly motherfucker who's super slow and he's a damage sponge, and if he hits you, he's going to do a ton of damage, but he's really slow and it's easy to see the attacks coming and stuff like that. I feel like there's just a lot of cookie cutter design when it comes to the enemies, where I feel like Doom's character design was very, very varied in the aesthetic, but also what the roles were to you. And it's unique character design is very, very important to give the world more of a sense of life and make it much more immersive that the player can get lost in. Another thing that I think that we've learned from Doom is that technology can be an arms race. This was a time period when Doom came out and was developed that the gaming space was very rapidly changing and expanding. Not only was the technology becoming exponentially more powerful, but the directions the market itself could flip at any moment. In the early stages, Apple computers were the ones seen to be the clear direction for PC gaming, and it was going to go full on Apple. And would anyone say that's the exact same as it is right now? It kind of flip-flop a couple times. but it's clearly gone the direction where Windows is now the main platform when it comes to gaming. When it comes to coming out ahead and being known in the video game industry, offering something new from everyone else is obviously, it's one of the obvious ways to do it. If you're offering something different from all other people, that tends to get attention. But once something cements itself as being the new thing, everyone seems to swarm to it. Being the one to break from the pack actually brings something new to the market is risky, because obviously it takes time and money to explore a new idea, because if it's going to break from the market and be something new, it has to be something that's unexplored to an extent. It's also not easy to do, because now more than ever creating content. God, I'm sorry, I'm totally losing my train of thought with this one. This is one of the last things I typed and I was very, very tired. There it is. When you're creating something new, if someone else happens to create something similar to yours and then they beat you to the punch on release, it's basically like all wasted resources on your end to have gotten to that point. And then on top of that, there's also so much content out there in the first place that it becomes difficult to differentiate yourself from it. So even if what you make is so fantastic and amazing and new, you have to still stand out amongst such a massive sea of people and content out there in the first place. And this seems like very basic, obvious stuff, and it is, but it is also important, I think, to state this, because this is true for most things in technology. It's not just something specifically for content creators on, like, say, Twitch or YouTube, or when it comes to creating a new invention. Video games are just the same as everything else in life, is that it's very difficult to break away from the pack and make yourself known. But that is exactly what Doom did, and when Doom did it, it completely took over the entire fucking gaming landscape. It went from being this underground studio to being the face of video games for a time. Very US-centric opinion on Apple. Everywhere else, where the home computer market was far more diverse. By a significant factor, maybe. Yes, but when the Apple II was launched, Apple was focusing on making it a product for developers, for programmers to make games on. That might have been the reason that Apple decided to deviate from video games, because the Commodore 64 outsold it. But when Apple II was released, it was advertised heavily towards programmers as, we are making this system as something that's meant to make games, to make games. Literally no mention of the Commodore 64, huh? What? I've heard of the Commodore 64, but I would not recognize the system myself. Roto Honk, hello. Thank you for the resub. For the 3 years. We're getting to the end of the discussion. We're almost done. And then the other major important thing I think that we could take away and learn from Doom is sometimes it takes a gamer and it doesn't take money. I want the record to show I don't like using the word gamer in that context, but I didn't really know what else to put in place of it. Publishers and big businesses are the ones who have the capital more than anyone to make games. But I mean, they're the ones who have the money for a reason, and that's because they're very, very, very careful with it. Why do you think when Doom came out, there were so many Doom clones? Because they knew that was the end thing, and they knew it wasn't groundbreaking, but if they made games like it, they would most likely get some type of return on it. They knew it wouldn't be earth-shattering, but they would still get some kind of profit. Publishers and big developers don't always have the foresight and the ability to see what's actually a good idea when it comes to games. It can be hard to separate the entertainment from the business itself. They try to create something with an idea on what people like, but then they focus more on trying to make it safe and therefore turn a profit, as opposed to making something fun or good or great. And obviously, even if you still make something fun, good, or great, it goes back to that previous issue we talked about before of you then have to get your product out there in a way that people can enjoy it, in a way that people will see it and realize they will enjoy it. But the people who know better than anyone else when a game is fun is the people who make games. It was made up of people who loved more than anything to do what they did. Carmack was all about, he loved programming more than anyone else. John Romero loved video games more than anyone else. Adrian wanted more than anything else to make that art style the way he did. Tom wanted to make story more than anyone else, and he realized that wasn't working, so he left. When they had this team of 4 talented, competent individuals working together on a project for a medium that they all enjoyed, because again, while programming was the forte and the main focus of Carmack, he still loved video games. Adrian, while his main thing was artwork, he still loved video games. When you have 4 talented, competent individuals working together on a project for a medium that they enjoy, they were the reason they were able to make lightning strike 4 times with with Commander Keen, with Doom, with Quake, with Wolfenstein. And it was all because they knew how to make fun games. They knew what they were doing. So, you know, it can be risky, obviously, to make games because of the money. But if you have people who go in there and they are just focused on making a fun game, it can really change everything. Chex Quest. Yep, Chex Quest is the big one. All right. So that's all that we can learn from Doom. Again, I'm sure there's plenty more that can be learned from Doom. This is just the general takeaways that I had. So now it's just the closing thoughts. This is normally, I do closing thoughts if I ever play a game for the first time in the series. So my thoughts on Doom itself, I was very, very pleasantly surprised. I know there are examples of games that are very, very old and they still age very, very well. Super Mario RPG is one of those games that come to mind. I remember looking at the art, the visuals for Mario RPG. I'm like, oh my god, really? That? Guess I'll try it. And I fucking loved it. I had so much fun with that game. Doom was one of those games that I really, really thought, I thought Doom was one of those examples of a game that was very monumental, very influential, but aged poorly. I assumed it was because it was a cultural phenomenon and people were experiencing it at the time, that they were heavily influenced by rose-colored glasses, and I expected it to be okay. I genuinely had a lot of fun playing Doom. I'd never played it before, never played any Doom game in the series. The only thing I had played was Doom 2016 for about 30 minutes or like 45 minutes or something, and that was it. Going into Doom was just so much fun because, again, it was just, the entire focus was just fun fucking gameplay. I think part of what they did also that benefited it was it felt smooth like a modern game. A lot of these older games, they generally have to they had to dial it back by making the everything slow paced to handle on the hardware better, and that could definitely make it feel like a bit of a slog or make things go slower. It's why games like Super Mario World, Super Mario Brothers 3, why Metroid and Super Metroid and Doom, like, these games were fun, because while visuals will always change when it comes to the pace of the gameplay, games that are closer to that 60 FPS just tend to, as a whole, feel a lot better and a lot smoother. So I think that was a huge part. The fact that they put such an emphasis on quick gameplay made a huge impact. But as a whole, I was so shocked to enjoy the game the way I did. As for my experiences with the other Doom games, I played Doom 3, I played Doom 64 and Doom 2. I loved Doom. Doom was great. Not a huge fan of Doom 2, to be honest. I felt like once Doom 2 had come around, they had realized that they had something great, and their focus at that point was just to make a very difficult game, because, again, Doom 2 is the same as Doom 1, same engine. They added some extra characters, they added the super shotgun, they added some new stuff, but for the most part, it was still the same game. It was just more levels, and I think the focus on that game was just to make it really, really fucking hard. And I was not a huge fan of that, because, I mean, it was still the earlier days. This was pretty much the birth of the FPS and this type of experience, so they didn't really know yet how to make fair difficulty and fun difficulty. It was just overly punishing. Like, if you fell off the ledge, you would fall into this pit, which sometimes wouldn't have a way out, but if it did, you'd have to wander around in the lava or the toxic waste trying to find a teleporter or trying to find a secret door that you would move out of the way to get back upstairs again. It felt so overly punishing. So while I like the new stuff they added to Doom 2, I just felt like the difficulty spike just didn't make it enjoyable. Doom 64 I enjoyed, except for the final boss. Just felt really nice and smooth. Pretty much very similar to Doom 1. And then Doom 3 I just didn't like. I felt like they didn't know what they wanted to do with that game. To be honest, like, Doom 3 is kind of already fallen out of my head. I played it like 2 weeks ago and I don't even really remember anything about that game. It just felt very uninspired. I don't know, was not a fan of Doom 3. But Doom 1, fucking fantastic, man. Really, really, just the fact that a game almost 30 years old felt just as clean as enjoyable and as enjoyable as a modern day game. Very, very impressive. So I've already covered this, but how did Wolfenstein affect Doom sales? Like, did Wolfenstein kind of flop initially and then Doom went big, or was it just kind of a chain reaction thing? Chain reaction thing. It pretty much didn't have a stinker. They had Commander Keen, which sold very, very well. They had Commander Keen 2, which sold very, very well. And then they did Wolfenstein, which was, again, kind of the beta origin phase of modern day FPSs. It was still slower than Doom, but a much faster game. A very unique experience, a very visceral experience, a very unique experience. And then we had, it was still following the shareware model. It was getting the attention, the negative attention, the negative press about it being a bloody, gory game. But everything that it had really created was very polished and was a very unique experience. So they had a great reputation going into the release of Doom that made people extremely hyped and anticipated. And the press release they released in January of 1993 to get people to announce the game officially, they were saying like, this is gonna be the greatest game of all time. Like, they were hyping the shit out of this game. They were not lowballing it. They were not going into this, they were going to this 100%. So Wolfenstein sales were good. They were fine. They were definitely good. They were making good money. But it absolutely like was not any kind of negative or detriment to to Doom sales. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I'm trying to think what else. But yeah, Wolfenstein did not flop by any means. Wolfenstein did great. I mean, at the top of the, when Doom started development, Wolfenstein and the Commander Keens were both taking up all 3 slots in the top, the shareware charts in terms of sales. So. Anyone else have anything to contribute? Anything else that they want to say before we're done here? Because I am pretty much tapped out on what I have to say on the discussion. Yeah, there were clones, exactly. Just like they were Doom clones, there were Wolfenstein clones. But that's what they were. They were clones. And again, while Wolfenstein was successful and it did very well, it was still relatively underground. It did not have the mainstream success that Doom did. Yeah, the engine for Wolfenstein was licensed to Raven? Or was that the Doom one? The engines that Carmack had created were licensed to other studios to create other products as well over time. Yeah, there was I think, wasn't it Raven? I think Raven was actually the one who made like a fantasy type of Doom game that they use like mana instead of bullets. I think it was Raven. Super Noah's Ark. I did hear about Super Noah's Ark. Is Heretic? Yeah, that's what it was. So, I mean, there were Wolfenstein clones, there were Doom clones. Everyone was trying to imitate id, everything they did. I'm very excited to play Doom 2016. excited. I'll be doing Doom 2016 next. Yeah, so the plan is next game I'll be playing for the design to play discussion will be Doom 2016. I'll be playing that starting tomorrow. And then after Doom 2016, while I'm researching Doom 2016, I'm gonna play Doom Eternal, complete Doom Eternal. That way I can basically run through the entire Doom franchise. And then after I have the discussion for Doom 2016, the next game I plan on playing is Demon's Souls, but I will be playing the original release on PlayStation 3. So we'll be doing the OG release. So yeah, next two games, Doom 2016, have the discussion, and then Demon's Souls is the discussion after that. I might consider covering Quake at some point. I don't know. I do know Quake is definitely a important game, but not nearly as important as Doom. So I will consider it, but I have a list of other things I plan on doing that I want to do. But yeah, pretty much it. Doom 2016, Doom Eternal. And I think what I'm going to do after I complete Doom Eternal, while I'm doing the research of Doom 2016 for the discussion, I'll probably end up playing Cyberpunk for a week, just because there's just that game has so much hype up behind it. The years leading up to its release had so much hype behind it, and there's a lot of controversy with the game now that's come out, both in performance but also other controversies as well. So I want to honestly just get my hands on the game and experience it for myself. So yeah, I'll be doing, in terms of games I will be like playing on stream, is going to be Doom 2016, Doom Eternal, then Cyberpunk. In terms of game I'll be doing for the discussion of design to play is going to be Doom 2016 and then Demon's Souls. And I had another game after I really planned on doing for Demon's Souls, but I can't remember what it was. Drawing a blank on that. Too busy celebrating Doom's birthday. Yeah, that's right. Doom's birthday was actually three days ago. Yep. Would have been really cool if I managed to get this discussion done like a week ago and had it up by Doom's birthday, but oh well. This was a lot of stuff. Like normally my discussion notes for games are like 15 20 pages. This one was 30. Look at all the fucking notes I had for this one. Goes up to page 30, 31 technically, and then these are all like the notes that I took from the book and like other different sources and stuff. But this game was a lot to research this time around, a lot more. So I just couldn't get it done in time. It happens. But thank you everyone to watching. I do appreciate it. I will see you for the next episode of Design to Play. And you guys are great. Thanks for hanging out. Have a good day.